markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen after more inflation data. We have the Dow leading the gains, up more than 1%. S&P 500 up 0.8%. The Nasdaq up 0.6%. The two-year yield 4.39%, down 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.20%, and that's down 3 basis points. Moving the markets, medical device manufacturer Dexcom down 40%. The company cut its full-year sales forecast for its glucose monitoring devices. Then you have Bristol-Myers Squibb up 8%, raised its 2024 profit forecast thanks to higher demand for newer drugs. And finally, in other news, it looks like McDonald's $5 value meal, well, it's working. It's led to an increase in U.S. visits, brought back some low-income diners as well. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and John.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Steele alongside John Tucker. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and economics and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. There was a lot of news in the auto industry of late. There was, the last week has been kind of crazy. It was pretty mixed. Recently, Bloomberg Hot Pursuit podcast hosts Matt Miller and Hannah Elliott spoke with General Motors President Mark Royce. And Royce focused on GM's new car, the C8 Corvette Z06.
Corvette and C8 is designed from day one to be accessible to a lot of different folks at different price points. And right now we've got 50% of the market in sports cars. So, and we're doing it very profitably. So I'd say we have the formula pretty well understood. And, I want everybody to be able to enjoy these cars. And, I don't think Corvette or Chevrolet stands for anything else. It's not farmed out. It's not made somewhere else. It's not, $500,000. It's none of that. It's a pretty thoughtful progression in price that matches the performance.
Well, one performance, though, has not been the automakers this week. That was GM President Mark Royce joining
By the way,
Matt Miller,
that
Hannah Elliott.
can go over 200 miles an hour.
What?
Yeah.
Well, why do you ever want to do that? This is a different question.
I don't know if you're late, your kids are late for school.
Yes, of course, that 200 miles per hour. You can watch that full interview on the Bloomberg Hot Pursuit podcast this weekend. Definitely check that out with host Matt Miller and Hannah Elliott. In the meantime, you can talk up that car all you want, but man, the automakers had an enormously difficult week. Stellantis earnings fell 50% in the first half of the year. Ford shares have fallen the most since 2008. GM was a standout in terms of delivering strong results on Tuesday and raised its forecast for the full year. For more, we're joined by Steve Mann, Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrials Research Analyst. Steve, can you walk us through the have and have-nots? Why did some get hurt so much and some survived okay?
Yeah, just before I go into that, by the way, that new Corvette, it actually has as much horsepower as the F1 race car. So
no, but literally, why do we need
even
that?
Faster.
I don't understand. Why do we need that?
Because we can.
Yeah,
you're going to get arrested. You can't drive it.
Yeah. Oh, getting back to your question, Getting back to your original question, I know it was a really bad week for the automakers. I think what we've seen, for example, on the EV side, where we had a lot of price competition that has occurred in the last 2 years, I think it's going to happen with the ICE vehicles as well in the next 6 to probably 12 months, and that's what the concerns are for the investor. There's a lot of inventory. We've been calling that the inventory is rising, discounting increasing. And now it's not as bad as it was before COVID, but the fact is the trend is up, meaning higher discount is coming and continued higher inventory. So, that's, who's leading that is really the Dodge Stellantis, the Dodge, the Jeep, those vehicles have the highest inventory level compared to Ford and GM and even the Japanese. So, every automaker, I feel, it's going to have to start lowering prices. And we are starting to see that.
Yeah, that was my next question. Who can afford a new car these days with interest rates where they are and what the manufacturers are charging? The manufacturers' suggested retail price for these vehicles. The average is somewhere around $40,000, right?
Oh, it's even higher. It's probably closer to 50,000. You're exactly right. You know, a lot of, because over the last few years, a lot of the automakers have been switching over to the more expensive trucks and SUVs, and that's where the profit generating vehicles are. But I think with higher interest rate, with a higher monthly payments, if you're financing or leasing a vehicle, I think the consumer is actually reassessing. Do I need to pay $1,600, for example, for a GM Suburban? And do I need to pay for an F1 Fleet 50 Platinum? Do I need to pay $1,600 per month for that vehicle? So
$1,600. That's more than my mortgage.
That's crazy.
So it's getting too expensive, especially now with the economy slowing down. And you heard LV, you heard Gucci. Those luxury makers are actually feeling it, and the auto buying cars is not a very cheap item. It's a high price, expensive item. So so the auto industry, I think the investors are catching on that the next 6 to 12 months we're gonna have to the earnings for these automakers is probably going to be at risk.
Yeah, really, really, really tough week. Those earnings just not great for some of them. All right, thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it. Steve Mann, Bloomberg Intelligence Global Autos and Industrials Research Analyst. There was another story that was reading high. That was a surprise to many, and that is the SEC suing Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports. This is the SEC's biggest move yet in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout these bearish bets. Joining us now is Tom Schoenberg, a Bloomberg senior reporter. Tom, can you walk us through what we know about the suit?
Well, first of all, who is Mr. Left?
Oh, sorry. Who's Mr. Left?
Andrew Left is a famed short seller. He has a website, Citron Research, and he's been making sort of bearish bets for years. Kind of a real sort of well-known voice in stock trading.
So what was the problem? Because, I mean, short sellers, long guys come on, they talk about the stocks they like. Sure. Short sellers come on, they talk about what they don't like about the stock, and they have positions on that benefit if the stock goes down. But we know all of this. So what was the specific problem with Andrew Left?
So what's happening here is we have both the SEC and the DOJ now. The criminal case alleging that Andrew Left was essentially not trading on the way he was telling the public he was going to be trading. He would essentially profit from going out, either releasing a report or tweets or other social media or interviews saying company stock should be valued at X. And as the market moved to that, he was immediately getting out and sort of making a profit on those sort of short-term stock movements.
So he was saying one thing and doing another, basically.
That's correct. That's according to the government. Yes.
This is something that's been kind of plaguing this industry for a while, isn't it?
Well, this is obviously the meme stock frenzy from about 3 years ago. Caused sort of a deeper look into this, both by Congress and then as we're seeing here, the Justice Department, the SEC, and it looks like they're looking at conduct. Conduct in both of these cases go as far back as 2018, and with the Justice Department saying as recent as October 2023.
So this conversation happens at home like every 6 months. My husband says, I don't understand short selling. Why do we allow it? And my response is like, because it helps keep markets or CEOs in check because they have someone being more critical on
you're
stuff.
Defending the shorts.
I'm just explaining. But you know what? If we look at it, like, why do we allow short selling?
Right. Well, what you see with, Andrew Left essentially became sort of a well-known short seller in part because a number of the reports that he released, wound up leading to actual charges against the company or, SEC violations and so on. So he established having a good reputation in the space. And what the government is saying here is that, once he had that reputation, had that audience, he sort of misused that to sort of essentially fool people into moving to a certain position that he himself wasn't maintaining, even though he gave the illusion that that's where he was.
What are the companies involved? What do we know the names?
Well, we got everything from Tesla, Roku, NVIDIA. There's about I think 24 or more in here.
And how much did he make as a result of this? Do we know what the
SEC? Yeah, SEC is saying that he profited as much as $20 million from this, which also involved, one of the criminal charges against Andrew is for lying to federal agents, claiming that he also didn't receive any compensation from hedge funds. They're saying he received more than $1 million from 2 hedge funds.
Real quick, have we heard from Mr. Left?
At the moment, he's not commenting. If that changes, obviously we will report that.
All right, we appreciate it. Thank you very much, Tom. Tom Schoenberg, Bloomberg senior reporter, joining us on that. Coming up, Steve Major, global head of fixed income research at HSBC, in a rare appearance in the New York studio because he doesn't live here. This is very exciting. All the questions you wanted to ask on yield curve inversion. John Tucker's very excited. And in the meantime, we go to Michael Barr now for world and national news on this Friday. Michael Barr, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, John, and Lisa. Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama today endorsed the presidential candidacy of Kamala Harris. The video of Michelle Obama was released during their phone call to the vice president.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
Former President Obama said, "We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office." Meanwhile, Vice President Harris is leaning into an online strategy to reach out to Gen Z voters. She's joined TikTok, and her supporters are turning her comment from last year about coconut trees into a meme, and they're trolling Republican running mate J.D. Vance for referring to Harris years ago as a childless cat lady. We got reaction from AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist Greg Valliere.
They want to mock Kamala Harris as somebody who never got married, never really had her own biological kids. I think it's a pretty dirty trick, and I think they are trying to make an argument that childless, cat-owning women are hurting the country. I mean, that's just crazy stuff. You can't make this stuff up.
Greg Valliere of AGF on Bloomberg Surveillance. Former President Donald Trump is due to talk face-to-face with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the first time in nearly 4 years. In today's meeting at Mar-a-Lago, Trump will seek to mend ties that were damaged at the end of his presidency when Netanyahu recognized Joe Biden as president. The U.S. Justice Department says Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a longtime leader of Mexico's cartel, and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, a son of another infamous cartel leader, have been arrested by authorities in Texas. Global News 24 hours a day.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks on the rise after the latest inflation read. Well, it did little to change the feeling that the Fed will be able to cut rates in September. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has the numbers.
PCE price index comes in spot on, hits on the screws, 0.1% for the increase in June, same as forecast. The PCE year over year, 2.5%. That is as forecasted, down 1/10 from last month. And then the core comes in 0.2 as forecast.
Now, the core came in at 2.6% year over year. That was a tick higher than expected. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.38%, down 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.19%, and that's down 4 basis points. Shares of Mercedes-Benz Group down about 0.1% in Germany. Says profitability, that'll be affected by the EV slump. Also, strong competition in China hurting them. Meanwhile, General Motors unveiled its new gas-powered Corvette ZR1. Now, it's the most powerful model yet, which, yes, John Tucker mentioned, has a top speed of 215 miles per hour. General Motors right now down about 0.2%. And Ken Griffin moving beyond splurging on dinosaur fossils. The Wall Street Journal says he recently purchased a nearly 2-acre waterfront estate in Saint-Tropez for more than $90 million in late June. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and John.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thanks a lot. I'm Alex Steele alongside John Tucker. Paul Sweeney is at the beach, not in his $90 million house in Saint-Tropez. Do you think he's going to put the dinosaur fossil thing in that house, or does that go somewhere else?
Who knows?
It'd be nice.
It's a TBD. It's a TBD.
He travels in a different lane than the rest of us.
Yeah, little bit. All right, let's get back to the market. Lisa was talking about what's happening in the bond market. You're seeing buying pretty much all across the curve. It's been quite a week, and we've seen a steepener over the last few days that has been quite a week. So we want to get some great insight here with Steve Major. He's the global head of fixed income research at HSBC. I keep saying he lives in Asia. It was Hong Kong, and now he's in Dubai.
Well,
but the
Hong
point
Kong,
is,
Shanghai Bank of Commerce, right? So
Banking Corporation.
Okay.
But the point is, he's never here. So you have to be on the early show, or he has to stay up late for you in order to get him on TV and radio. But he's here in studio, and this is very exciting. He has a prolific voice when it comes to the fixed income market. Steve, thanks for being here. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So just broad strokes, what are your calls right now on the U.S. bond market?
Well, it's lower yields. We've tended to have a lower yield, as you know. And it's not just for the sake of it. We're not just doing it. We're not doing it to attract attention. It's because we incorporate a more structural and secular approach to the forecasting. Look, if you just do it based on the cyclicals, you'd always have a higher yield. And that might explain why other people think yields should be 5. And so to me, if yields are bearing down on 4 for the 10-year right now, and you ask me where we'll be in a year or so's time, I would say nearer to 3 than 5.
So you're looking at the stuff that's not necessarily short-termy, but the more long-termy stuff.
Exactly, structural and secular. Structural tends to be more things like regulation, perhaps. Secular would be more demographic. So the impact of aging populations, things that...
That's really long-term.
Yeah, well, yes, but then you need to, because you have to have a view on the equilibrium to have a view on the 10-year. Now, this is where many people switch off. They'll say, well, I can't observe this R star or this equilibrium rate, so I'm not going to use it. Well, everyone who buys or sells a 10-year security is implicitly taking a view on that number, because the 10-year yield is not defined by today's policy rate. It's defined by the path of that policy rate and where it ends up in the longer run. So if you think that the longer run equilibrium policy rate is 4, for example, then you think that the yield probably won't go down much more from here. And you would also think that the Fed isn't particularly restrictive.
Okay.
Right? That's an interesting point.
So
Yeah.
Is the Fed restrictive? Because I can't figure out. And then also, when you answer that question for me, what goes into making that determination whether or not they are restrictive?
Yeah, so our assumption is that the Fed's longer run equilibrium is about where the Fed thinks it is, which is 2.5%, and it's sort of 2.7 to be precise, and it's pretty much unchanged from before the pandemic. Now, I would look at this as scientifically as possible. It's difficult to be a scientist in bonds, really, but the point is, what has changed? And it's very easy to say the market indicates something has changed, therefore the world has changed. That's not good enough. All there is a risk premium around the possibility that the world has changed. It's very different. So I think that the policy is restrictive because today's rate is more than double what the longer run equilibrium is.
How do you look at something like fiscal stimulus? And I appreciate that you're going to say that that's cyclical. But when we're looking at something globally from the energy transition, where companies, private equity, and governments are going to be spending boatloads of money in the next 30 years, how does that fit into your model?
Yeah, so there's a debt and a deficit. There's a stock and a flow effect. I think that when you're talking about deficits that are going up and therefore more bonds, you can see how that can feed into the risk premium. But then the debt stock is a drag on longer run growth because it has to be rolled over and financed, and it takes cash flow away from investment and consumption. My point is that it can be a little bit too easy and somewhat lazy to say there's a lot of supply, therefore the yield has to go up, because you really do need to know what's on the other side. Now, when it comes to bonds, the substitution effect, if you like, it depends on the value. What do bonds look like compared to stocks? What do bonds look like compared to money? What do government bonds look like compared to credit, et cetera, et cetera? It strikes me that the valuation argument for bonds is looking pretty good.
All right, so what am I supposed to buy right now?
Well, most real money investors, that's different to a hedge fund or a trader, are sitting in what we call the belly, in the middle maturities, in credit. That way they mitigate the negative carry because the market's implying the cuts. So, good quality, you can buy indices of good quality credit, and you're going to get a yield more than on the S&P 500 forward earnings. And to me, you could have said that at any point in the last year, but ultimately it's a safe investment to be buying good quality US corporates.
What about in the Treasury curve? Where do you think we're going to see the most action?
Alex, you mentioned the steepener. That's been playing out. Do you know that the movement in, let's look at 2s 10s, right? The 2s 10s has moved about as much as it did in the 1 month after the 2016 election, which says that if there is a trade around this, it just played out. It just happened. Now, it's all about the probabilities around the election result, and we've just seen a huge swing in that in the last few weeks. So the idea that it was all one-way traffic and there was only going to be one winner and one outcome with one set of policies, that's no longer clear today. So if the steepener was predicated on that, then I think people will start to think again. So it's, to put a steepener on at this point today, given how much it just moved, I think would be dangerous.
But what if it wasn't about the election? What if it was about pricing in the cuts?
And I think you're spot on, because in fact, it's been the recent inflation prints and the cooling real economy that has dominated the scenario analysis and the fiscal views and the election views. And so that's explained the steepening. That's explained why 2s are pushing to the low yield for the last year. But the problem is, if you enter today, you buy a 2-year that is so far through the money market rate that if the Fed isn't cutting, and cutting by more than is priced in on the WIRP screen, you're not going to make any money. And so that's why I think that the steepener may have played out.
Okay, so the obligatory question, we'll finish up with this. September, and what's the path forward beyond September?
Well, baseline is they do 25. The interesting thing is the scenarios around that, whether it could be more. To me, to value a bond today, you need to think about not just the next couple of meetings, it's through next year as well. They're in an easing path, and I think that they will deliver at least what's in the forwards, which makes it difficult to buy the front end, but makes you want to be a bit higher up on the curve.
Steve, it's so good to see you. Stephen Major, Global Head of Fixed Income Research at HSBC. So helpful to understand all those different dynamics. I was taking notes. Did you see me?
Hear from his underground lair.
He doesn't look... Oh, he was just somewhere else. I just mean. All right,
He's
come
like
back next
the man
time.
of mystery.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll just go with it. Steve Major, the man of mystery. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, much more coming up. If you want to go to the Paris Olympics as an athlete, maybe you don't have air conditioner. Did you know about this? We'll get more on this. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Shares of Lyft, well, they're getting a bit of a lift of their own after the California Supreme Court ruled that the rideshare company can keep classifying their drivers as independent contractors. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta explains why this is a big deal.
The risk here was that if they are not independent contractors, they're full-time employees, that would mean the companies would have to pay, one, higher compensation, and two, more things like benefits, insurance, et cetera.
All right, so we have Lyft up about 0.4% right now, but the ruling also includes Uber, but its shares taking a turn right now, down more than 1.5%. To earnings, 3M, the maker of Post-it notes, it raised its full-year profit forecast. This is under the leadership of its new CEO, Bill Brown. We have shares up 17%. Colgate-Palmolive posted better than expected second quarter earnings, backed its full-year guidance. We have Colgate up about 3.5%. Eli Lilly down more than $120 billion in market value. Rival obesity drugs from Viking Therapeutics, also from Roche. They post encouraging progress. That's the reason for that. So Eli Lilly down about 1%. We'll check in with Novo Nordisk in the same camp, down about 0.3%. European drug regulators, they've rejected an Alzheimer's therapy from Biogen and Eisai. Biogen right now, that's down about 7%. To technology now, Apple's iPhone dropped out of China's top 5 in the June quarter. Local companies like Huawei Technologies, they're surging ahead in the smartphone market. That's according to market tracker IDC. We have Apple down about 0.2%. OpenAI testing a ChatGPT-powered search engine could put the company in direct competition with Google. It's called SearchGPT. And Citron Capital and Andrew Left reportedly being sued by the SEC over stock short sales. That is your company news at this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it. I'm Alex Steele. In with John Tucker. Paul Sweeney is setting himself on the Jersey Shore. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economic, and finance through your lens of Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. We also keep you up to date with world and national news with Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex, John, Lisa. The French National Rail Company says high-speed lines have been hit by arson attacks that heavily disrupted traffic on the day of the Olympics opening ceremony. Lines in the west, north, and east of France were affected. Government officials denounced the incidents hours before the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli has more from Paris.
What happened overnight is what has been defined by authorities a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the network of France's TGV trains. Those are the superfast trains just hours ahead of the inauguration ceremony. At least a minimum, at least 800,000 visitors are currently stranded, passengers stranded.
Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli reports the disruptions could last through the weekend. The head of France's National Rail Company says fires were set at 3 critical rail nodes, and the network will have to be repaired cable by cable. Following a string of endorsements from top Democrats, former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama are the last major leaders of the party to formally back Vice President Harris since she officially launched her presidential campaign Sunday. A new ad depicting Harris taking a call from the Obamas was released today.
Kamala.
Hello. Hi.
Hey there.
Oh, hi, you're both together. Oh, it's good to hear you both.
Meanwhile, following high-stakes meetings with White House officials in D.C., Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to meet with former President Trump today. Authorities say a Northern California wildfire that has tripled in size in one day was started by a man who pushed a burning car into a gully. Officials say they have arrested a 42-year-old man who will be arraigned Monday. The park fire has burned more than 250 square miles near the city of Chico. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, John, and now Charlie.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael Barr. So here was a fun one. This comes from the Wall Street Journal. So apparently, Paris wanted to make these Olympics really green. So in the Olympic Village, they opted for no air conditioning. Instead, they went with something where you run a cooling system that runs cold water through the floors that can help the ambient temperature and reduce it by about 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which basically means you have a range of 73 to 79. Did the U.S. team like this?
Oh, it's whining babies.
No, they did not. The 592-strong USA team delegation is getting portable AC units in every single room. This is according to a spokesman for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Now, it's not just them. Like, other teams did the same thing.
What's the average temperature in Paris this time of year? Do we know?
They're not expected to top 90 in the 10 days. So, sure, it's warm, but, like, you can't live with 75 degrees?
You need air conditioning then. But my question is
you can't live with 75 degrees.
No, I need a little cooler because I run so hot.
Obviously, as the Flamingo Sox will tell you.
When we sweep all the gold medals, are we going to get accused of cheating because we had air conditioning and nobody else had it?
No, because the USA team isn't alone in requesting the option to refrigerate itself. Apparently, again, this is according to the Wall Street Journal. Out of the 7,000 rooms in the village, 2,500 have been supplied with mobile air conditioning units as the team requested. But it's just, the whole team of the U.S.
Well, it's like all of Europe is not necessarily into air conditioning because they have this problem in the U.K. People want it. They want to install it in their buildings, and the local councils are like, no, it's ugly. You're not going to be able to install central air conditioning in this building.
Which, to be fair, is a good point. Like, they're just not equipped for the kind of heat. They're not Florida. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're not equipped for the kind of heat that they're now getting in the same way that, London is not set up for snow, and we're not set up for floods. Anyway, we're glad that the Olympic team gets what it needs, right?
They're so cool.
All right. Oh, no, that was so bad. All right, more coming up on the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it through a very crazy week. I'm Alex Steele. Alongside John Tucker, Paul Sweeney is off today. We have a lot to talk about in the next hour. First off, we are going to take you to Paris to check in on what is happening with the train system after that sabotage. Then we'll talk to Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, on the election look ahead after President Obama and First Lady endorsed Kamala Harris. Plus, it is Friday. It's Muni's in Focus. Bam, John Tucker.
Oh, I can't wait.
I have been literally prepping for this all week. Amanda Albright, Bloomberg Muni finance reporter, will be joining us. And finally, if we're looking ahead to the election, antitrust is very much in the spotlight. Jen Rhee, a Bloomberg Intelligence senior litigation analyst, literally no one better on that topic, will be joining us. In the meantime, though, let's get you caught up with a business flash. For that, we go to Charlie Peller.
Hi, thank you very much, Alex Steele. Here's what's going on. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all pushing higher. Most major groups in the S&P 500 higher on bets that the start of the policy easing cycle will keep fueling the outlook for corporate America. And key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will set the stage next week for a rate cut in September. S&P right now up 54 to 54.53, a gain of 1%. The Dow is surging 644 points, up 1.6%. NASDAQ up 0.8%. The Russell 2000 higher again today, up by another 1%. 10-year 4.20%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.38%. Spot gold up 0.8%, 23.83 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.4%, 76.45 for a barrel of WTI. And of course, our Bailey Lipschultz will have a whole lot more on the markets coming up in just a moment. Wall Street, though, looking ahead to a busy week as we hear from mega cap names including Microsoft, Amazon, Meta Platforms, and Apple. Sam Stovall is Chief Investment Strategist at CFRA.
Certainly next week, 40% of the cap weighting of the S&P 500 tech sector will be reporting earnings. Even though expectations are that we've seen a better movement in earnings for the technology sector, now at about 17%, up from 16% and change, I think, investors will definitely be paying a lot of attention to what is said and implied with these upcoming earnings.
Sam Stovall of CFRA, and among mega cap tech names today, Microsoft up 1.1%, Amazon up 1%, and Apple shares, they're up by 0.1%. So again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 54, up by 1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. So we want to go first off to Paris just to see what's actually happening on the ground, if the trains are running at all after the sabotage overnight. Hugo Miller is Geneva correspondent with Bloomberg News, and if my calculations are correct, we're going to have the opening ceremony in like 3.5 hours.
Cool, and if this is going to be on boats in the Seine.
Yeah.
They're not going to be walking around the stadium as we're kind of used to seeing.
Are you going to watch it on the beach?
No.
Yeah, all right. Are you going to watch it at all?
I find it very confusing. Like, where do I go to watch it? I know NBC's doing it, but they have like all these different channels that you got to pay for, and the last thing I'm going to do is pay to watch any Olympic event.
I feel like that kind of.
I mean, I'm into it, but it's just
he's into it, but just for free. All right, Hugo, you're joining us to kind of set up the stage for us. We are waiting 3.5 hours until the opening ceremony starts, which I will be watching, but I'll be here at Bloomberg. Are the trains running at all?
So far, the trains, good morning to you, or good afternoon to you, rather, from Paris. The trains are slowly coming back on track, but extensive delays have affected about 800,000 passengers at last count. But what I'm seeing around me on the streets of Paris is a lot of people on foot. There's just a steady stream of people that obviously not trusting the long-haul trains, but to be honest, are a bit stymied by all the metro closures that are being imposed for security reasons. So we just have a steady stream of people, and then periodically interrupted by squads of riot police and vans making their way down to the Olympic parade site.
How many of those 800,000 people you said were affected by the high-speed trains, how many of them were actually using those high-speed trains to get to the Olympics, or are those all people like looking to get out of Paris to go to their weekend homes?
It's a good question. I think there are a lot of people leaving to get out of the city. I came up on the TGV, thankfully unaffected, to Paris yesterday, and my carriage was pretty empty, but quite importantly, there were a number of athletes, I don't have an exact number, but certainly many hundred of athletes that were using the TGVs, the high-speed trains, to get to Paris that have been delayed by hours, if not more. No word yet on if they're actually missing any events, but it's certainly been a massive disruption for the city on the eve of the games.
All right, Hugo, thanks a lot. We appreciate you joining us. Have a great time. Be safe. Hugo Miller, Geneva correspondent with Bloomberg News, joining us on the streets of Paris. Let's get back to the markets here with Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg News senior equities reporter. Bailey, are you watching the Olympics?
I will watch some events, but I'm kind of like JT where I go on the stream. I use my Amazon Fire Stick, and if something is on when I'm bored at home, I will watch it, but I won't seek out basketball.
I'm more of a Winter Olympics, like downhill. So
I'm like super pumped.
You're locked in. What events are you excited for, though?
Well, tonight is Deadpool night, so like after we get past that Deadpool night,
wait, that's
then
an
it'll
event?
be Olympic. Yes, for me it is. I like organized. I drop my kid off at someone's house. Like she's gonna have a sleepover.
It's
a whole
not
thing.
an Olympic event.
Oh no. What am I most excited for? Oh, gymnastics.
Gymnastics is fun. Like, do you have a event within gymnastics that you like? Beam. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
pretty awesome.
To me, if I'm looking to watch something, I will see what events are on, and I'll probably watch it. Like, I love watching beach volleyball, but I also am not going to like set a reminder that beach volleyball at like 11 a.m. is what I need to watch.
So good. All right.
I am happy though that it's closer to our time zone. I hate when it's like, well, you can watch the events from last night at 2 p.m. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway.
So clearly there's a lot of Olympic watching right here in the radio studio. There is definitely stock watching. Bailey, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so one of the worst performers, we talked about Dexcom being among the worst performers in the S&P 500. The second worst performer, Biogen, down 6.6%. This coming after it and its partner, Eisai, were told by European regulators that their Alzheimer's disease drug filing was rejected. So it is actually sold and marketed and approved in the US, Japan, China, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Israel, but being rejected by European Union. When I looked at initial reactions from some analysts, they're basically saying the rejection in Europe will take the wind out of the sails, obviously.
Why was it rejected in Europe, though? I mean, because it doesn't work? Clearly that's not the case.
There's a lot of scrutiny around the Alzheimer's drugs and how they've been developed and what they actually work. So when you look at the statement from the European regulators, they say that the observed effect on delaying cognitive decline does not counterbalance the risks of adverse events associated with it. So risk reward, in their view, isn't strong enough to approve the drug.
Okay. It raises the question for me, will regulators on this side of the Atlantic ever get on the same page as regulators on the other side of the
They're normally supposed to be pretty in line, and that's what, having covered healthcare for the first 3 years of my career here at Bloomberg, it was typically, if it was approved in the US or Europe, vice versa, you kind of could pencil it in. And that's why I think you're seeing a sharper reaction, because many analysts and investors had been expecting that.
God bless you.
Thank you. Sorry, that was me. Okay, Charter Communications. It was pretty good, right?
Yeah, up 15% right now, beating expectations. Free cash flow, according to Bloomberg Intelligence, stunning, as they described it. The subscriber losses for broadband were better than feared, basically showing that the Affordable Connectivity Program ending had much more of a manageable impact than feared. They're also showing strength in their wireless unit. So free cash flow expectations beat, EBITDA stronger, and sales really kind of exactly what analysts and investors, for the most part, are looking at and looking for this earnings season.
And a cutthroat business.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Is it not?
And then Mohawk, right? Yeah. So this is the best performing stock in the S&P, and I don't even know what this company does.
They make carpet, right?
Flooring,
among other things.
Flooring, carpeting, tile,
So this
rugs.
This is like a housing play.
This.
So if I see interest rates go down, I'm going to say, wow, Mohawk must be up because they make stuff for the housing.
Exactly. And when they beat today,
I got that right?
You did. Nice
you did. You were right. You were spot. Well, you're also, I forget, are you a Lowe's or a Home Depot guy?
This is a long question.
I'm the local lumber yard guy.
Support your local economy. I respect it. Mohawk rallying, though.
The lumber straighter.
Earnings and outlook beating expectations. But the interesting thing is they're still not seeing strong remodeling market that's driving it. So the real reason that they beat is that they are seeing volume trends better than feared, but input costs are dropping and productivity is ramping up. So that's why you're seeing really the beat across margins with many of their units, even though the net sales were a bit weaker than Wall Street was looking for, dropping 5% year over year to 2.8 billion. Estimates were for 2.83 billion. But nonetheless, it does seem like when you look at operating margins, not only here in the U.S. but across North America, but the rest of the world, better than expected. That's why the stock is rallying. And JT, as you mentioned, if we see interest rates falling and people are remodeling homes, whether they're buying them or remodeling to sell,
you bought a house?
Bought a house.
You did? I didn't know this.
You also got married.
A nightmare.
I knew he got married.
Yeah, bought the house before we got married.
Oh, interesting.
A fun decision.
What's your latest project?
I still need to figure out. We still have a leak from our chimney. And that has been the bane of my existence for not 10 months, but like 6 months at this point. Thought I fixed it. We paid for the flashing to be replaced.
Flashing.
Did not fix it. So I think it's the lining of the chimney, which I'm nervous about how much that's going to cost.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
John Tucker will be free afternoon, so he can help you out. You think I'm kidding? He built his own bathroom out of a closet, but don't get me started on that. All right, Bailey, thanks a lot. Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg News senior equities reporter, joining us there. All right, to politics we go. So the latest was that former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama have officially endorsed Vice President, now presidential candidate. Can I say that now? Kamala Harris? Presumptive nominee, Kamala Harris. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst, joins us now. Nathan, the last sort of, lever falls into place for Kamala Harris. What can we expect over the weekend?
So I'm actually hoping that we don't expect all that much. I mean, after 2 weekends, of having really big news. But, the next thing for us really is to try and figure out who Kamala Harris is going to pick as her vice presidential candidate. The betting markets, which you can find in the terminal at WSL Election, are really suggesting it's coming down to Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona and Senator Josh Shapiro out of Pennsylvania. Senator Cooper and Senator Bashar out of North Carolina and Kentucky being the others. But, just remember that Kamala Harris has a lot of time. The Chicago election isn't until August 22nd, and that's when she actually has to pick that vice presidential nominee. So, I'm thinking that they may take some time on this. The news cycle is worth them right now. Maybe they're going to play that up again. So I'm thinking for the next week or so, it could be just more back to what we originally thought, just a campaign for the presidency.
What does history teach us? I mean, Pennsylvania, Shapiro, 19 delegates there?
Yeah, so I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but, for the Democrats, it's this idea of the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The other couple of swing states...
I just want to... I should have follow up with my actual question. Picking a vice presidential candidate, does that really move the needle for the person who's on the top of the ticket? Does it matter?
Yeah, I think it would matter at a specific state level. So if you go with Josh Shapiro, obviously I think you're going to get a boost because he's really popular in the state of Pennsylvania. But just to remember that we're also talking about the vice presidential picks here. When it comes to policy and the one debate that's between the vice president, historically it's usually people don't go to the polls to vote for the vice president. They go to the polls and they go to the ballots to vote for the president. So, there's a lot of focus on the VP candidates, and certainly we cover at BI in terms of how they could ultimately influence policy and so forth like that. But, at the end of the day, when people go to November, they're going to be voting for either President Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris.
When do we think we're going to get real policy initiatives from Kamala Harris? I appreciate that in her first sort of campaign speech, she's not going to do that. Like, her goal is to get everyone jazzed up and excited. When do you think we're going to start to hear more specifics?
I actually don't think it's going to come all that too soon. I mean, when we went back to look at some of their policy statements, we had to go all the way back to our time as Attorney General as California. And I think August, they're just going to focus more so on this idea of, the vice presidential pick. And I think you'll see a little bit more on border and a little bit more on immigration. But when it comes to like her economic policy, foreign relations and so forth like that, I think we aren't going to see the specifics until we get to September, which is the debate season. And so after Labor Day, after the August recess, I think Americans will really be paying attention to the race then. And at that point, Kamala Harris is going to have to explain those policy positions. I think the next 2 weeks or so, they're just going to try and figure it out. Just because remember, her campaign is only, 5 days old at this point? So I think there's still a lot of baby steps that campaign has to do. And then we'll see more and more of the policy statements, I think, towards Labor Day and maybe even to September at that point.
Do you know how long we have to wait before we get really good polling data?
I think it's the first, we've already started to see the first polls that have come out post the Biden decision, but it's early and it's at a national level. I think some more of the state polling data that was more important to us in terms of like Pennsylvania, Arizona, and so forth like that, that's being conducted this week. And so I think, and please don't hold me to this, it'll probably be the tail end of next week when we start to see that.
Do we trust polls now, John Tucker? Is that something that we do?
Dewey defeated Truman, didn't he?
Oh, but okay. It was a little bit ago, though. So when it comes to the campaign, is the campaign infrastructure for President Biden, is that infrastructure set up for Kamala Harris right now to do what she needs to do and travel a lot and do a lot of rallies and get her name out there?
According to them, yes, but I would say just, it's also, you have the ground staff, but you also have the leadership staff. And I think the leadership staff is going to obviously change, if not in direct positions, but in terms of influence. I mean, look, Vice President Harris had a campaign back in 2020. It didn't go so well for her. She was one of the first people to drop out of the Democratic nomination process. However, the Democratic Party is fairly aligned at this point. And so I think that there are other people out there who are certainly interested, if not serving in the campaign, but at least be able to whisper into that campaign. So I think what's happening right now is that, obviously they're going through this growth. They didn't really have much of a plan up until Sunday or maybe a few days beforehand. So I think they'll have another week or two. But then, come August, early August, mid-August, I think they'll be fine in terms of moving forward.
Is there going to be a debate? Is that a sure thing?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, look, if President Trump, were to back out with one of the dates, the September 10th date, if I recall correctly, is still moving forward, and I think they've invited both candidates for a September 17th debate. And look, if one of the candidates at this point decides to drop out, I think that's a serious mistake on their part. But, you know, it's Washington politics. Anything can happen. But I think at this point, certainly they'll entertain it. And I think ultimately they'll have one, if not two, debates going forward.
Oh, boy. We're definitely watching that.
Well, I'm more interested in, like, the forum that it's going to take.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Nathan, we thank you. We really do hope you have a weekend for the first time in quite a while. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence,
count on it.
Senior Policy Analyst. Don't scare the guy. Okay, much more coming up. We're going to talk to Amanda Albright, Bloomberg Muni Finance reporter. Now, John Tucker, I have literally been sending our producer Muni stories all week.
About this.
I am really nervous about munis.
What do you have against munis?
I don't know my depth of ability to talk about munis, so I have like a million stories now to talk about. We'll get to that in just a moment.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. A Friday rally today. Wall Street's rotation into riskier corners of the stock market got another boost this morning after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will set the stage next week for a rate cut in September. S&P higher by 47, up 0.6%. The Dow is rallying 1.46% right now, up 583 points, 40,517 on the Dow. NASDAQ up 103 now, up by 0.6%. The Russell 2000 up another 0.7%. 10-year yield 4.20%. The 2-year 4.39%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.3%, 76.48 a barrel. JP Morgan Chase has launched a generative artificial intelligence tool and told its employees to think of it as a research analyst that can offer information, solutions, and advice. This all according to an internal memo that was seen by Bloomberg News. Again, recapping, stocks higher. The Dow up an even 600 right now. S&P up 50, up 0.9. The 10-year 4.20%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
Focus on Munis is brought to you by Build America Mutual, insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of Building America. Invest in BAM.
BAM.
Insured bonds. How'd I do?
Amanda, come on, you can chime in there. Go BAM.
BAM. Oh, she sounded like me when I first started doing the show.
Yeah, she'll get it.
We're going to get you. You just got to really own it and like jump in there. Amanda Albright is a municipal finance reporter, and she joins us from Bloomberg News. Okay,
Picking
Amanda.
up the mantle, I should say, from Joe Mysak. You
Yes.
have some pretty big shoes to fill there, Amanda.
Yes, very big shoes to fill.
But no pressure. We support you.
Yeah.
We miss him and we support you. There were a couple stories that caught my eye this week because I have lack of confidence when it comes to my ability to discuss munis. So I want to make sure that I can handle this segment. Goldman Sachs makes a bet on a muni ETF market, $109 billion muni ETF market. What have they done this week?
Yeah, so Goldman has joined the rush of firms that we've seen that have started offering muni bond ETFs. Goldman Sachs Asset Management already had a muni ETF, but they are kind of getting deeper involved in the space with four new funds. So one of the funds appeals to folks in New York that are worried about their taxes. That's been a common theme lately. There's another fund that kind of mimics like a cash-like fund, except it's tax exempt. So unlike money market funds that are paying, upwards of 5%, you can kind of shield your taxes if you invest in their ultra short muni fund. So we've seen a bunch of companies get further involved in the ETF space just because it seems like that's kind of that and separately managed accounts are becoming a little bit more popular compared to traditional mutual funds.
And these are actively managed funds, right? And you said
Yes.
ultra short, so that sort of sets them apart from others?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it seems like actively managed is where other companies kind of see more of an opportunity to make an impact. The passive space within muni ETFs is very dominated by Vanguard and BlackRock. They have two extremely large funds that are both passively managed. And so I think it's a little bit harder for other companies to kind of gain market share in that segment. So we're seeing most of the launches within actively managed.
And are they popular?
I was just going to ask that.
Oh.
He stole it.
See, it's a mind meld between the two of us.
Actively managed is definitely it's growing, but I still think it's really hard to compete with two passively managed funds that are, I think when I ran the numbers, it was close to 70 billion between the two of them. So I still think passively managed being, so cheap and so easy for investors to get involved in, is still like, we shouldn't write that off. But I think a lot of the money managers are betting that, active will eventually gain more adoption.
And I'm guessing that these are for people who live in high tax states, right?
Exactly.
So it's just offered where? Like New York, California, New Jersey?
So there's a California fund and then a New York fund. So when we spoke to the folks at Goldman, they just mentioned that they're still hearing concerns about perennial concerns about high taxes in both of those states. And that's, kind of been, we're seeing a lot of demand for munis generally this year, and definitely taxes are part of that, especially given folks not knowing what's going to happen next year with tax rates. So taxes are front and center.
Let's move to another great story. It was a big take this week. You and a couple of your colleagues wrote about it, and the title is Harvard's $465 million in tax benefits draw some new scrutiny. Can you tell us about this big take? What was your takeaway, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so we have a story just kind of examining different tax benefits that Harvard has, just given the very intense focus on Harvard for the past, year. We focused a lot on the property side because there's a very rich and kind of long-standing debate over tax-exempt property in college towns across the U.S., not just in Boston and Cambridge. But we found that within Boston and Cambridge, there is kind of a growing push to have Harvard pay more in what's known as payments in lieu of taxes, or pilots. And that's basically an annual payment that Harvard makes every year to account for the fact that its property is tax exempt, which this is a debate that could be had at any college town with any university pretty much, because city leaders are always going to want more from their universities. But I think just the growing wealth at Harvard and, sky-high tuition has just kind of reinvigorated this debate. And it's a really interesting topic, and also very relevant to many elite institutions. The debate that's taking place both in city halls but also in Congress, because the Ivy League has become a major target lately.
Okay, the intersection of politics and munis. Hey, in the muni space, if we could back up what is issuance like, and what are some of the more interesting issues that you see out there?
Yeah, issuance has been pretty surprising this year. I think it's up 38%, a record first half of the year. That was something that Joe loved covering when he was with us.
By the way, he retired. We sound like he's died. He's retired.
Yes,
he's retired.
He's on a beach somewhere.
He's he's still rooting us on and reading our coverage. But there's just been so many for just kind of a preview for terminal readers. In a little bit, we should have a story about how a lot of these deals are getting totally gobbled up. There's like kind of, the food fight for muni deals. Some investors are kind of frustrated by this because they can't get enough bonds that they've put in orders for. And we're really seeing this across the board for, even very vanilla bond structures. And then, it's actually surprised me. There's not been a ton of deals that I've been really like, oh, this is so interesting that they're doing this. It's just kind of a typical infrastructure that we're seeing getting funded, and not a ton of high yield issuances, but just kind of across the board, general obligation bonds, AAA, AA, but yet there's so much demand for them. And I think part of that is people are worried that this is a rush before the election, trying to get ahead of any volatility, and people are worried that, after November, these sales are going to go away. So you kind of have to get in the market now while you can.
See, this is exciting. Is anybody on shaky ground?
No, I'm so surprised that everything is just, anytime the U.S. economy is doing well, muni issuers they do well. States do well. I just saw Virginia, I think they had $1 billion more in tax revenue than anticipated for the most recent fiscal year. It's really surprising just how well state and local finances have been holding up. It's pretty remarkable, but that just speaks to the broader economy.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is really surprising, particularly as the whole narrative of the COVID funding is running out. They're going to have huge budget shortfalls. And I feel like I have yet to hear that.
Yeah, we definitely haven't. Where I see stress is more higher ed, private colleges. Those aren't kind of typical classic muni credits, or, you know, they're not funded necessarily by tax revenues, but where we're seeing stress is not necessarily states and cities. It's more like a private college that's sold muni bonds. And I was talking with a colleague today about how schools that have been relying on pandemic relief funding, those are the areas that now that the funding is running out, schools are kind of where the stress is being seen rather than like a city. Though, of course, there's probably exceptions out there.
All right, Amanda, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Amanda Albright, municipal bonds reporter. Does Joe Mysick really email you about your stories?
Of course.
Oh my God, I love that. He's retired, but he's not retired. He's reading, he's listening. Yes, please tell him that we say hi. I learned a lot. That was really interesting.
And you were so not
I'm so
into
scared.
this segment.
Every Friday, Munis. I definitely get nervous.
Munis
All right,
are
coming up, we're going to talk. Okay, good. I'm glad you like them. All right, coming up, we're going to talk to Jennifer Reed, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Litigation Analyst. What happens to antitrust as we head into the election and then come out of the election? How that looks under a President Harris or a President Trump. Jen is truly the expert on this. We're going to get her take after this. For now, we go to Michael Barr for world and national news on this Friday. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex. John, Charlie. Service on France's high-speed trains has been disrupted by what officials are describing as a coordinated sabotage ahead of the Olympic opening ceremonies. Jean-Pierre Farandou, the chief executive of France's state railways company, SNCF, at a news conference said it is too early to know who is responsible.
There's an inquiry running at the moment, so the police force are looking after, of course, the people who have committed this assault against the French network.
SNCF's Jean-Pierre Farandou. The railway company estimates 800,000 passengers have been affected by what it describes as a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the high-speed line network. Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama have offered their full support to Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential race.
This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much.
The trio spoke in a phone call and a newly released video this morning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues his trip in the U.S. with a stop to visit former President Donald Trump. Later today, Netanyahu will meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Trump told Fox News Israel should end this war quickly because it has been decimated by the publicity. Baseball news, Dylan Cease threw a no-hitter as the Padres beat the Nationals 3-0.
I was throwing hard. For the most part, I was putting the heater kind of where I wanted to, so able to go up, go out with it, and then, when you're throwing hard and you're hitting your spots away, you can throw sliders off of that, so... really, I was just trying to attack the zone and, utilize what I had.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A Friday rally underway. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Russell 2000 as well. We have got the Dow very close to session highs, up 650 points right now, an advance of 1.6%. The S&P higher by 54 right now on the S&P, up by 1%. And the NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.8%, up 144 points. The NASDAQ 100 Index up 0.9. The Russell 2000 up now by 1%. 10-year yield 4.20% with a 2-year 4.39%. Spot gold up 0.9%, 23.85 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude dropping 2.2% now at 76.55 a barrel. Wall Street's rotation into riskier corners of the stock market got another boost this morning after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. And with more on this morning's inflation data, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Fed's preferred measure of inflation, core PCE, rose at a modest pace in June, up just 0.2% month over month. The data also show consumer spending is holding up even with interest rates at 2-decade highs. Taken together, the price and spending data suggest the Fed's interest rate policy is containing inflation without breaking the economy. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
3M shares are surging 18.9%. 3M raised its full-year profit forecast in a sign of progress as its new CEO looks to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer after a lengthy period of turmoil. Among 3M's products, by the way, Post-it notes. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Alex Steele alongside John Tucker. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, finance, and politics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts, because they cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. And one of the top is Jennifer Rhee. She's Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Litigation Analyst, and she delves really deep into all the prospective deals that we see, what the antitrust angst might be in all of the deals, and this feels particularly prescient. I said that right? Prescient?
Close enough.
Prescient? Okay. I make up words, and I feel okay about that. Prescient. When it comes to the election, if President Trump versus President Harris, which one would have a bigger effect on antitrust and what that windup would mean for the market? Jen joins us now. Jennifer, what are you working on right now?
Well, exactly what you were just talking about. I mean, we have such an interesting situation where we have a new administration coming in no matter what, now that President Biden has dropped out of the race. And I think, you know, we have a potential President Harris, and we don't really know what her policies are and her feelings are with respect to antitrust, especially as it applies to big tech. We know what would have happened if President Biden had been elected to another term. I think it would have been a continuation of the really aggressive push that we've seen in the last 3 years. And we have some ideas of what President Trump might do because he was president previously, and we saw what he did then. But some say, look, you can't really go with what happened in his first administration. If he's reelected, things could be a little bit different. He could take a different approach. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to what's going to happen next year on the antitrust front.
Is it safe to say that Biden administration set some kind of record in terms of antitrust actions? It is, right?
Absolutely, John. I think so. You know, I went back and I looked at a lot of past administrations, even those that were considered fairly tough on antitrust, like President Clinton. And there are more challenges to deals coming out of the Biden administration than we've seen in many, many, many years. We haven't seen a greater percentage of in-depth investigation, but what we've seen are more of those deals that get investigated having to go to court in order to try to close.
I heard J.D. Vance's speech. He didn't sound particularly friendly to Wall Street. I don't know if that's just bluster or what.
No, you know, he's been really consistent with this message, and he's interesting because he's an economic populist. And there are some that think his views are actually even more extreme than the views of the current chair of the FTC, Lina Khan, who is considered to be, you know, very progressive when it comes to antitrust and has kind of led this crusade against deals and against big tech. He has said she's one of the only Biden officials who's done a good job. So we know he's aligned with what she's been doing. And it would be vice president if President Trump won. And that doesn't mean he's making policy, but it does mean he'd be there. He'd have President Trump's ear. He could contribute to the new appointees to the Department of Justice and to the Federal Trade Commission. So there could be some influence there.
When we talk about sectors, though, like, can big tech get any bigger on either ticket?
I don't think big tech can necessarily get either bigger on either ticket. I think there's some changes that have been made in the way we think about antitrust in the last 3 years that are here to stick. In other words, I don't really think, even if there's any easing up, that we're going to go back to the way we were before the Biden administration. But I do think it's possible that the chances that some of these monopolization suits against some of the big tech platforms could settle potentially in the next administration, more so than now, because I do think there's a real rigidity to the approach by the Department of Justice and FTC under Biden, particularly because they've really been endorsed by him after he issued an executive order a couple years ago, basically promoting a whole of government approach to trying to combat consolidation and overly concentrated industries. But I do see a potential uptick in the possibility of some of these cases settling.
The huge IT blow up that we saw, it was just a week ago, right? Can regulators say, see, this is what happens when you consolidate, in particular, I guess in this case, the cloud industry?
Well, I think some of them are already out there saying that. And it's a position that's interesting because it's a position against monopoly generally. And, we have legal precedent in this country, and our Supreme Court has said over and over that it's not illegal to have a monopoly position. It's just illegally to behave badly to exclude rivals in order to maintain that monopoly position. And so the argument that's being made is really contrary to Supreme Court precedent, and precedent that I don't really see changing given the makeup of the Supreme Court today. So what might be an example of a negative impact of having a firm that's dominant in an industry, it provides information, it provides fodder for the progressives, the antitrust progressives to make their argument against monopoly. But I don't really think anything's going to change with respect to how we view a company fairly obtaining a monopoly position.
So for companies that do want to acquire, what is a strategy that we're seeing? Is it get in the queue now or wait until after the election? Like, what are you seeing most evolve?
I think I was seeing wait. I was seeing some sentiment that, a month ago or so, where I think a lot of people thought President Trump had this wrapped up and would likely win. I was seeing some sentiment that, okay, new Republican administration going to be more business friendly. I actually thought that was a mistake. I don't think this would be a typical Republican administration. That may have been the old orthodoxy, and we may have seen that 40, 50 years up until now, that when Republican administrations took over, things were easier for deals. I don't think that would have been the case. And we have to remember that the antitrust push started to tick up under President Trump, and his enforcement teams did challenge some deals that were unexpected, such as AT&T and Time Warner. So I don't necessarily think that waiting was a smart policy, but at this point, we have such an unknown going forward next year that maybe it is.
You were right on, spot on with Live Nation. So I'm going to ask you, predict who's next. Got a minute.
Oh, did we lose you, Jen?
I think so.
Oh, no.
Wait a second.
No, we got you. We got
Start
you.
from the beginning. We thought my question was so difficult. You just tried to avoid it.
She would never.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but who's next? Yeah. Can you hear me, Jen?
I can hear you. What did you ask?
I said, who's next in terms of antitrust enforcement? You got 20 seconds.
Okay, I think we're going to look at some push in the healthcare industry, possibly pharmacy benefit managers, possibly some health insurers. I think this is what the FTC is really digging into right now.
All right, and she did it in 10 seconds. Just the best. All right, Jen, thanks a lot. We really appreciate Jen Reed, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Litigation Analyst, joining us on everything we need to know about antitrust headed into the election. It is interesting, though, because the theory, at least in the fall of last year, was, or the winter, let's just wait. Wait till after the election. Things will get easier. I don't know if that's true anymore.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. All right, we have more coming up. We're almost wrapping up here, Bloomberg Intelligence on the week. But we have more for you. John's not watching the Olympics.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Authorities are accusing the famed short seller Andrew Leff of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports, their biggest move yet in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout their bearish bets. The SEC is alleging that Leff used his firm, Citron, to generate about $20 million in profits from illegal trading involving almost 24 companies. The Justice Department also announced a criminal case against Leff, accusing him of securities fraud. Leff had no immediate comment. Stocks are trading higher today with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green. Coming up top of the hour, we will recap markets for you, but the Dow right now, best level of the day. McDonald's new $5 meal deal has led to a modest increase in U.S. visits and brought back some low-income diners. The first signs of the burger chain's strategy to appear more affordable is paying off. Dexcom shares are plunging after the company cut its full-year sales forecast. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Kimberly Adams.
Charlie, the San Diego-based medical device manufacturer said it expects revenue of $4 billion to $405 billion for 2024, compared to an earlier estimate of $4.2 billion to $4.35 billion. On a call with analysts, Dexcom executives said the company saw fewer new customers than expected after a revamp of its sales force and lower revenue per customer than anticipated. CEO Kevin Sayer said the company believes its long-term target for 2025 is still valid, with revenue coming in closer to the low end of the range. Executives said revenue was also impacted by higher rebates as some large healthcare plans administering government programs shifted how they reimbursed for Dexcom's products. Charlie?
And those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Friday afternoon. I'm Alex Steele alongside John Tucker. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our interactive broker studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. And guess what? Michael Barr is here.
When you can see him,
tease.
then you toss to him.
Okay, he stands behind the pole. Michael Barr is here with world and national news. Michael.
Why, thank you, Alex, John, Charlie. It is the endorsement she's been waiting for. Vice President Kamala Harris officially won the backing of Barack and Michelle Obama in a video posted online this morning. Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank has more.
Let's call this the final coming together of the entire Democratic Party, of the entire sort of not for Donald Trump group, right? Joe Biden steps down, endorses Kamala Harris 30 minutes later, and then at that point you set off this cascade potentially of people who could run against her. Every single one of them, one by one, says no.
Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank. Meanwhile, former President Trump will meet face-to-face with Israel's Prime Minister. Benjamin Netanyahu will arrive at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort for the talk. The Justice Department announced last night that the FBI had arrested 2 suspected leaders of the notorious drug trafficking organization known as Sinaloa Cartel, Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia and Joaquin Guzman Lopez. Lopez is the son of cartel co-founder Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. GOP leaders are reacting to the dramatic cartel drug bust. House Speaker Mike Johnson says they have been sounding the alarms about this in Congress. Johnson was touring the southern border in California, blaming the Biden administration for the flow of drugs into the U.S.
I'm afraid that the only thing that will stop this catastrophe is the election of a new president. I believe Donald Trump, and he said that in his own words at a rally just a couple of days ago, we'll fix this on day one of the new administration.
Johnson told reporters Kamala Harris is a San Francisco radical who bears responsibility for a catastrophe at the border. French authorities called it a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the network of France's super-fast trains just hours ahead of the inauguration ceremony of the 2024 Olympic Games. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo said the opening ceremony will go on as planned. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Alex, John, Charlie.
Thank you so much, Michael Barr. Let's stay with the Olympics. I'm going to be watching it. I'm excited. You got like an hour and a half until the opening ceremony starts. John Tucker won't be, but here's a great piece from the Journal. It's getting passed around
That's not true.
everywhere in the Bloomberg newsroom. Apparently, Olympic swimmers pee in the pool. So here it is. Lily King is a 3-time Olympian for the Team USA, and she said, "Yup, I peed in every single pool I've swam in." And the idea is you got to keep hydrated, but you're in these really tight suits, so therefore going to the bathroom
part of the
is
story
very
says
tricky.
it takes up to 20 minutes to wriggle into one of these swimsuits. We're not talking about the little Speedos, but those almost full body suits that they wear.
So in that case, if you gotta go, you gotta go. Zach Harding, who competed for the U.S. at the Tokyo Olympics, says he was in a high school state championship when he had the urge to go, and he went in the pool because he was already in that tight-fitted racing suit, and now he feels like he has to pee every time before he competes in a pool. Now it's like part of the ritual.
Well, I have to pee every time I do a newscast, so, you know.
Well, don't do it in here.
They were telling me to make sure to keep it on the rails for John Tucker, but Michael Barr swoops in and derails the whole thing.
No, I remember like growing up as a kid at the pool club. We went to they had an ashtray. It said, "Please, we don't swim in your toilet, so please don't pee in our pool." So
Cool. But then again, no one was wearing those like super tight, skin tight suits that help you go really fast and have cool aerodynamics.
So the
and all
answer
of that.
is lots of chlorine, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Chlorine everywhere. The Seine, I don't know what we're going to do about that. Apparently it's still a little dirty anyway, so, does it really matter?
Pee in the Seine is the last of their worries.
So we're going to leave you with this wonderful broadcast, guys. Have a great weekend. Watch those opening Olympics. You got Balance of Power with host Joe Matthew coming up right now.
Politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The transformation is complete. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Vice President Kamala Harris checks the final box by landing the Obama endorsement. We're going to talk about the changing state of this race evolving as we speak with former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania. With analysis from our signature panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us here on the Friday edition. Of course, the economic news today, all important in the world of politics, as the Fed's favorite reading on inflation stays tame in June. We'll review with Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics and a lot more ahead this hour. On the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Investors in a pretty good mood about the latest data, and Charlie Pellet has more for us on the reaction. Charlie, how's it look?
Right now, midday, Joe Matthew, best level of the day right now after this morning's economic data. Goldilocks, some people are calling it that, right to the numbers here because they are big numbers to the upside. S&P right now up 66, a gain of 1.2%. Dow Industrials now with a 700 handle. What a week this has been. The Dow up 722 points, now up by 1.8%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 180, higher now by 1.1%. 10-year at 4.20% with a 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold up $21 the ounce to $23.86, up 0.9%. And a retreat today for crude oil under $77 a barrel, $76.95, down now by 1.7%. Wall Street's rotation into riskier corners of the stock market did get another boost this morning after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher. Well, certainly plenty for investors to keep an eye on, including the economic data and earnings. But Katerina Simonetti is Senior VP for Private Wealth at Morgan Stanley.
The factor that weighs on the market more than anything is us going into the election season, and the presidential elections, as we know historically, come with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of volatility. So we are optimistic about the fact that we are going to see the rate cuts and that the economy is starting to recover in the areas, outside of Mag 7.
Certainly a topic we got you covered on here on Balance of Power. Morgan Stanley's Caterina Simonetti. 3M up the most in more than 36 years. After raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vowed to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine, 3M right now surging by 19.3%. Again, recapping here, big upside numbers. The Dow up 750 points, up 1.9%. To put that in context, S&P up 1.3%, 10-year 4.20%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. What a difference a couple days making here. Remarkable. Markets here up 1 to 2%, depending on where you look. And again, it all brings us back to our data check this morning. PCE, as we always remind you, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. And the numbers are pretty great. Mild is the key word here. The Fed's favored price gauge rising at a mild pace, says the headline. Spending holds up, which is part of this as well. And now I'm hearing, realizing they're outliers, a little more chatter about what would happen if there was a rate cut next week. Anna Wong joins us, I'm glad to say, the chief U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics. Anna, it's great to see you. Welcome. How important is this specific data point in building a trend that will lead to interest rate cuts?
Yeah, so as they say, 1 is just a data point, 3 really is a trend. So we have so far 3 pretty good inflation data print, and the 3-month annualized core PCE inflation is running at 2.3% with today's data point, and that's pretty close to what the Fed wants to see. And this is why I think that this will clear the table for the Fed to start cutting rates in September.
So is that because they need time to telegraph this? You don't think they come out of the box with a surprise for this market next week?
Yeah, I think the Fed is still not very confident that it's going to keep on this favorable disinflation trend is going to keep on going. Powell articulated very well in the last FOMC meeting and during the press conference that there's a thing called negative base effect. So as we get into September, the year-over-year inflation print will start to get worse and worse. It will be it's possible that on a year-on-year basis, you will see core PCE inflation actually drift back up because of this unfavorable base effect. So I think in the back of their mind, they still wonder whether this is going to keep on going, and this is why they're waiting to see.
Do they also wonder about potential deterioration in the job market by holding on for another couple of months? What difference could that make?
Yeah, definitely they do. So as you probably know, we have been writing a lot on how the payrolls is overstating the strength of the labor market. And it looks like the many Fed officials have increasingly been coming to that view that, in fact, the strength of the payrolls are not necessarily reflective on the underlying conditions, and that we are seeing it takes longer for people to find a job. The median duration of unemployed is longer, and also the SOM rule, which is a popular metric of identifying recessions. Well, if we do see 4.1 unemployment rate next Friday in the payroll report, the SOM rules calculation would rise to 0.47, which is really close to the 0.5 trigger of a recession. So I think the Fed is definitely paying attention.
But if they're data dependent, you say they wait till September. If they're concerned about surprising the market, they wait till September. You don't see any movement next week.
Yeah, I don't see any movement next week. It's simply that there's not enough agreement within the committee. I mean, surely there are, about 6 of the FOMC members who think that it's time to cut, but I think for most of them, they're
do they
not
telegraph the next move in the statement, or does Jay Powell do it in the news conference?
I think both, likely.
Fascinating. Anna, thank you so much. The PCE is behind us, and a great conversation with Anna Wong, chief U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The political ramifications of the economic data here are huge. Just ask Kamala Harris if they think they can put a bow on this whole inflation story by the time we're walking into the election in November. In the wake of Labor Day, it would be a huge deal. Another huge deal for Kamala Harris today is the big endorsement we've all been waiting for. I guess the transformation is complete, as I said earlier. The Obamas, not surprisingly, are on board. They rolled it out in a video, and it's not a big, movie trailer style thing, or even Barack Obama sitting there with Michelle Obama explaining the decision. It's a phone call. They got the cameras out to take the phone call from the Obamas. Here's what it looks like.
Kamala.
Hello. Hi.
Hey there.
Oh, hi. You're both together. Oh, it's good to hear you both.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh, my goodness. Michelle, Brock, this means so much to me.
Felt like I was watching reality TV. Is that how we roll out endorsements now? I guess it's creative. I'll ask some folks smarter than me over the course of the next 2 hours about this. But to get a sense of the landscape here and what this change in direction in the campaign means for not only the mushy middle, as some call them, but the double haters who emerge in the most recent Siena College New York Times poll, as well as former Nikki Haley supporters. And a great opportunity to bring you a conversation from a unique perspective of Charlie Dent, the former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania's 15th district, wrote an op-ed just after the debate calling on Joe Biden to drop out of this race. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us at the table today.
Delighted to be here.
It's a compelling read, especially after the fact now. When you go back and read the op-ed that you wrote for MS, first you write, I feel dumber after listening to that debate. I think we all can agree with that and understand. Democrats, you wrote, this is the end of your column. Democrats will say it's too hard and too late to replace Biden. Nonsense, you said. The Democratic National Convention is in August. They can do it, but do they have the guts? So is the Democratic Party the party of guts now?
Well, I have to give them a lot of credit for doing what they needed to do. That took a lot of discipline. It did take guts, and I commend them. They had a real problem on their hands, and they dealt with it. Now, we could argue whether or not they should have had a more open process than they did, but they felt they didn't have the time. Next person up was Kamala Harris. They got her in. They've got everybody on board, and game on. So I have to give them a lot of credit for doing that. I don't know the Republicans could have done that. I think Republicans would be smart to replace their candidate too, given his unpopularity.
Yes.
But that's not going to happen.
He and Joe Biden shared that unpopularity. So to what extent is this an instant game changer?
Well, it is a big game changer simply because of the fact that, the Republicans were effectively able to make the argument that Joe Biden was unfit for office, that he had diminished capacity, and that wasn't going to go away. Well, that issue is now off the table, and the Democrats will probably be able to flip the script and say, well, the fitness question now is your guy, given all the erratic and dangerous things that he has said, and, oh, by the way, he's old too. So I think they're going to be able to effectively make that case. Of course, Republicans are going to counter that Kamala Harris is too liberal, far too progressive, and outside the mainstream. But it's a different. The race has been reset, and it's more of a binary choice now than it was prior to Biden's departure.
We were seeing in states like yours 20+% protest vote for Donald Trump in the form of a Nikki Haley vote, even though she had left the race. Still a lot of these Nikki Haley style Republicans wondering what to do. And I'm not sure they saw the answer last Thursday night when Hulk Hogan was ripping his shirt off in Milwaukee, or when Donald Trump was setting the record for the all-time stem winder convention speech. How does Kamala Harris reach them?
Well, she has an opportunity. These Haley voters are still up for grabs. I know the Republicans thought that their convention really was a unifying event.
Yeah.
Well, they were unified inside the room. in the room, yes, but outside the room,
I'm sure that's what they meant.
Yeah, these folks, there are still these. I was one of those Nikki Haley voters in Pennsylvania. About 20% of Republicans voted for Nikki Haley in a closed primary state, and those voters are still up for grabs. I think so. In many ways, I think Harris has an opportunity if she can moderate on some positions, say like trade and tariffs, and maybe some other areas. She might have an opportunity to get those voters. But those folks are still up for grabs. Some of them are going to go with Trump. Haley has endorsed Trump. She wants to keep her options open for a future election.
Right.
But that doesn't mean her voters are necessarily following her. Some of them will.
Well, that's really important. I mean, that's could decide this race. When you say to moderate on things like tariffs, does Kamala Harris need to say we're the free market party now? The Republican Party is now the isolationist tariff party.
Well, I think if, as you know, I'm part of a group, our Republican Legacy, and we're trying to get the Republican Party back to some core principles.
Does that
the
include
Constitution.
tariffs?
No, it does not include tariffs. So, but free markets, and we would object to these types of high punitive tariffs that we think protect the privileged few at the expense of the many. So we would, we're for the rule of law. We are for the Constitution. We are for free markets, for fiscal discipline and peace through strength and embracing allies. So she has an opportunity to engage in constructive international foreign policy that embraces allies. I mean, she has an opportunity with those Haley voters there. She has an opportunity with them certainly on tariffs, where we reject this idea of raising taxes on everything that comes into the United States. And of course, we, the consumers, pay. And as we saw with the Trump tariffs on much of the product coming in from China, we ended up paying more in subsidies to farmers than we took in tariff revenue from China. And so, so here's an opportunity for Kamala Harris to get some of these voters. The Democrats, I don't know if they're going to become a pure free market party, but there's the opportunity now, given where the Republican Party is under the MAGA.
An opportunity to at least draw a contrast. This group that you mentioned are
involved in advocating for or against any particular candidate for office. What we are a lot of dispirited Republicans who want to stay part of the Republican Party, but simply want this party to go into a different direction. We want an alternative argument to MAGA's argument. We believe we're looking beyond 2024, that regardless of what happens in this election, we want this party to become focused on principles. We've been around, the principles that we talk about: the Constitution, rule of law, the Union. We talk about free markets, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility. These are principles that have sustained the party for 170 years. The MAGA argument, they really don't have core principles, and many of the principles I've just outlined are inconsistent or incompatible with what MAGA is talking about on free markets, on peace through strength. We are in a very different place. And so what we want to do is create this argument. There's, for far too long, direction for the party and for this country.
Really fascinating. And you've got some very recognizable bold faces on board with that group now. There was a conventional wisdom that MAGA would last as long as Donald Trump, that no one could replace the maestro here, and that whether it was one or two terms, that would kind of be the extent of the movement. And by the way, I kept hearing that in Milwaukee, not a party, a movement when it came to MAGA. With that said, now we have J.D. Vance on board, and I also heard in Milwaukee that he's the heir apparent, that this is 2028, that MAGA will live past Donald Trump. What do you say to that?
Well, it's clear that J.D. Vance was selected as almost a legacy pick for Donald Trump. J.D. Vance...
And to target districts like your old districts in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, although he'll have a tough time in mine. It's a swing district. And but look, J.D. Vance was selected because he can better articulate the MAGA agenda than, frankly, Donald Trump can. That's what he's doing. And what we're doing is that is a movement. But what we are trying to do also is create a movement of Republicans who want something better. You mentioned some of our leaders, Jack Danforth, Alan Simpson, Bill Cohen, and many others who want to talk about this. We want to engage in this debate with the MAGA crowd. We think we're on the right track. J.D. Vance, he's basically chair of the Russia Appeasement Ukraine Surrender Caucus. That's not where we are as an organization. We believe in these allies. We believe in pushing back against autocrats. We think that Russian aggression is out of bounds and must be resisted. We don't want Putin to win, unlike Vance. And so this is where I think we can draw some really hard contrasts that speak to the Republican Party. I know of Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan and the Bushes and many, many others. And so that's where we want to go. We recognize the party's not going back to where it was, but we wanted to go to a better place, and we're ready to engage whatever MAGA is going to look like after Trump is off the stage.
Well, I'm really glad you could come talk to us about it. Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania. The group, our Republican legacy. It's great to see you. Thank you, sir. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ continuing to advance, trading very close to session highs. Wall Street's rotation into riskier corners of the market got another boost this morning after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher right now. Again, the S&P up by 70 points, an advance of 1.3%. The Dow up 720 points, up 1.8%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up right now by 1.2%, with the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares gaining by 1.3%. We've got the 10-year at 4.20%, the 2-year right now 4.38%. Spot gold up $24 the ounce, up 1%, and West Texas Intermediate crude lower by 1.3%, 77.23 a barrel. Dexcom shares are plunging after the company cut its full-year sales forecast for the glucose monitoring devices relied upon by diabetics. Dexcom shares, they are plunging right now by just about 41%. Again, recapping stocks higher, S&P up 69, up 1.3%. Balance of Power continues now, the Friday edition. What a week. Back we go to Washington, and once again, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Charlie's right. Go back to, well, Sunday, if you want to start really at the beginning of the week, and just walk through in your head everything that has happened over the past 5-6 days, the ramifications that these events will have on American political history. Impossible to know right now, but that's why we're all here, to write the first draft. And when you have such a crazy, busy week like we have, think of, my God, we started with a letter from the President of the United States dropping out of the presidential race. I'm not going to walk you through what happened each day this week. You were with us. We have a new nominee, though. We have a new race on our hands, and it comes 2 weeks after an attempted assassination. It keeps us from being able to focus on a lot of things that we normally talk about. And in one case here, an incredibly important story, dated the 25th of July, and this comes from our friend Tony Capaccio at the Pentagon. U.S. sees first Russia-China joint bomber flights off Alaska. They're saying that this is not a surprise, which maybe is true for them, but it's a big deal. And Tony's been doing a lot of great reporting, not only on this, but on our ICBM program, and he's with us now at the table. Thanks for crossing the river. It's good to see you.
Thank you for the invite.
Well, as always, my goodness, tell me what's real. You were with the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin when this came up yesterday. The U.S. tracking, again, Chinese and Russian bombers flying together. And we see a lot of these intercepts of Chinese or Russian bombers.
Or U.S. and U.K. flights against Russia.
Fine. This combination is new. Are we whistling past the graveyard with it's not a surprise to us? What's the real posture of the Pentagon on this?
Not a surprise. A couple things. The way this unfolded, NORAD put out a statement Wednesday night at 6:42 Eastern Standard Time that everybody missed, including me and every other news organization. So it became the biggest story in the world the next morning.
Okay.
So much for vigilance.
Gee whiz.
All right. The not surprise, interesting because according to the Russian Defense Ministry, they put out a statement today on Telegram saying this was like the 6th of these flights.
Wow.
At practice flights. They had apparently earlier this year, Russia and China signed an agreement to combine air operations. So I think what's not surprising is the U.S. knew that and probably had been tracking some of these earlier flights.
Okay.
The newness here is that it was way over north to Alaska. Yeah. It wasn't the Alaska coastline. It wasn't where like cruise ships would go. Sure. It was where the Bering Strait and the Sea of Chuchiki, I'm mispronouncing that possibly, way the heck up near the top of the globe.
Got it.
Where they came through, where it happened. It was the Air Defense Identification Zone. Mm-hmm. They were in that apparently, and then F-16s, F-18, Canadian F-18, and F-35s intercepted them. But according to the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian jets were also accompanying them, so it was pretty interesting. And the Russian ministry identified the Chinese bomber, as the H-6K model. The DoD would not identify the model. The model is significant because it can carry 6 or 7 long-range cruise missiles, and it can do air refueling.
So this sounds like a big deal. I mean, if something went wrong, as has happened in these intercepts, that in itself would be a big deal. But tell me, what were they practicing for?
Hey, the sky's the limit here in a way. There's a lot of questions that go through my mind, but they could have been practicing long-range air refueling, tandem air refueling, command and control between the airplanes, and more importantly, their respective command centers.
Wow.
So this is more than just planes flying. It's the whole minuet of a 5-hour mission, apparently, that showed up way off the Canadian-U.S. border.
To what extent, then, can we assume the Russian and Chinese militaries are working together to fend off the West?
I think this is a really good example of it because this is a very visible example. I think more troubling would be if Chinese submarines, the 6 JL6s, I think they're Gen-class nuclear-capable submarines were operating with Russian submarines. That would be even more troubling because you wouldn't see them.
Incredible stuff. So not a surprise, but what are we going to do about it from here? Just intercept them one at a time? Is there a political statement to be made here?
Well, the political statement was the Pentagon last Monday unveiled its latest Arctic strategy, where Deputy Defense Secretary Hicks highlighted increased cooperation between China and Russia. Well, this is an example of in-your-face cooperation. I'm pretty sure the two are connected.
In-your-face cooperation, says Tony Capaccio. This is remarkable stuff, and it comes at the same time. You've got Russian boats parked in Cuba. Should this be a bigger story in the United
I wouldn't make
States?
too much of that.
No?
The U.S. does port visits all the time. Cuba is an ally of Russia. Yeah. This is not the Cuban Missile Crisis revisited.
Okay.
I don't think they're there anymore. They may be there, but I wasn't aware of it. But I think much ado was made of it, and then it kind of ebbed.
Yes, right.
Because port visits between allies, and Cuba and Russia
they
are
were
allies.
important at the same time as the Canadians. That must have been a hell of a party.
Yeah, Cuba's a cool place, too. I visited there in 2016. So did the Rolling Stones, so everybody goes there.
Right, you are.
Even Russian battleships.
I had the pleasure of taking a trip to Havana.
Okay.
But it was the Hemingway House. It's a whole other story.
The mojitos at his famous bar.
Anything about
but anyway,
that.
Russian sailors being there, Russian ships.
Yeah.
It's not the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, you're blowing the lid off of a lot of things at the Pentagon, including this ICBM program I need to hear about. You started working on this, Tony, several weeks ago. It's become a major story. Cost overruns, 81% cost overruns. Mm-hmm. This is the land-based component of the triad. Can you just give us a primer on what's going on here? Because we're overspending. We're even digging holes in the wrong places. Do we need this component of the triad anymore? I just asked you a lot of questions.
This is a theological question, a nuclear theology question that the Biden administration was not going to go against 50 years of doctrine that we need a triad. The problem here, in September 2020, in the waning months of the Trump administration, they allowed this program to be launched in what's called engineering and manufacturing development, full-scale development in layman's language. And it turns out a lot of the assumptions about military construction costs were way, way, way off. So it started back then. This administration, at least, is trying to bound the problem. There are like 450 Minuteman III silos around the country, in 3 states, basically. Okay. And a big assumption was that they could reuse a lot of those. Yeah. Apparently, they're not going to be able to reuse as many as they thought. And that was part of the original assumptions that are going wrong, basically. Now, if I'm the next administration...
And this is to upgrade the fleet. This is to...
It's to put in new missiles and take out the minuet.
They don't operate in the old holes.
No. Well, they could. No, that's the thing. The assumption was they could operate in some of these silos. Yeah. The Minuteman III silos, but you'd have to take the missile out, refurbish it, put in the new missile. It's a real missile minuet, so to speak, very complicated. Yeah. And there's the theology question is, do you really need to try the third leg, the land-based leg?
Do we? Have we answered that?
That is, nobody wants to touch that because that's the third rail of nuclear theology.
Well, that's true. But are we asking that because submarines have proven so effective? Because we have so much more air superiority than we did in the... You tell me.
Hey, this is submarine. The Columbia-class submarine is also running like a year and a half late. That's the second leg of the triad. Okay. But that's a little bit more stable, even though it's late. Yeah. The issue here is these are the most visible manifestations of U.S. nuclear power. Mm-hmm. You can see them. You can feel them. Right. You can touch them if you get permission to, in a museum, if nothing else. Right. But it's too embedded in the bipartisan political consensus of nuclear deterrence. Yes. I don't see that ending anytime soon. So now the next administration is going to have to deal with this money furball 3 or 4 years down the line because the Pentagon is going to take them another 2 years to really decipher the magnitude of this fiasco. And the big thing is, when will these first missiles be what they call initial operational capability? Yeah. The benchmark of last year was like in May of 2029 to June 30 was the optimal, or it was the threshold, the latest they wanted to be. Now the question is, how much beyond 2030 is the IOC of this third leg of the triad going to be? That's for the next administration to deal with, and they're...
Could they claw that back at that point?
Oh, they're
or is
hoping
the money
to.
spent? So the next administration could stop this whole optical deterrent.
They could, but it's not going to happen. I just don't see it happening. If it's Trump's not going to stop it, and Kamala Harris is not going to stop it either. That would be opening up real deep wounds if they tried. This is too embedded in the U.S. national security psyche right now. I don't see that happening as getting rid of the third leg of the triad.
What would be the implication for the defense industry?
I don't know. I think
we spend the money somewhere else.
I think someone. Oh, you mean implications? Yeah. Okay. Well, Northrop's got a big stake in this going forward.
You're writing about
but the rest of the, Northrop would benefit
shares
because
the blame, as I read in your headline, for this overrun.
Yeah, I think there's some of it, but it was mostly defense estimating, Air Force estimating. But the money would be spread, maybe buying more B-21 bombers that Northrop makes.
Right.
And maybe buying additional nuclear submarines that Huntington Ingalls and GD make.
So favor the other two. Stop digging new holes.
Yeah, but again, it's a perception. It's a theology thing.
This is an incredible story. Where else are you going to get this? If you don't have Tony Capaccio, you have nothing. Thank you so much for coming.
Sounds like a song.
Yeah, there's a song in there somewhere. Reporting from the Pentagon for us, and at the table today, Tony Capaccio on Bloomberg TV and radio, on YouTube and the satellite. It's all coming together. The Friday edition. Glad you're with us, Tony. Thank you. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick and Jeannie are here. But first, world and national news with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Barack and Michelle Obama endorsed Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. The former president and first lady released a video this morning showing Vice President Harris speaking on the phone with both of them.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
In a joint statement announcing the endorsement, the Obamas said, quote, "There's no doubt in our mind Kamala Harris has exactly what it takes to win this election and deliver for the American people." Coordinated arson attacks disrupted service on 3 high-speed train lines in France, causing widespread chaos on the day of the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli has more from Paris.
What happened overnight is what has been defined by authorities a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the network of France's TGV trains. Those are the super-fast trains just hours ahead of the inauguration ceremony.
Bloomberg's Albertina Torsoli reports a minimum of 800,000 people have been left stranded, and this disruption is expected to last through the weekend. The Manhattan DA is urging a judge not to overturn Donald Trump's hush money conviction. State prosecutors claim the Supreme Court's July 1st decision on presidential immunity for official acts made as president have no bearing on Trump's conviction on charges that he falsified business records in New York. Trump's lawyers argue that certain pieces of evidence should not have been introduced during the trial under the Supreme Court's new ruling. Trump was originally set to be sentenced July 11th, but the judge delayed the sentencing until September 18th to consider Trump's arguments. Trump denies any wrongdoing. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are holding very close to session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ solidly in the green. Let's begin, though, with the Russell 2000 up again today, up another 1.3%. By comparison, the S&P is advancing 1.4%, higher by 75 points. The Dow up 715 points. That is a gain now of 1.8%. NASDAQ up by 1.35%. The 10-year, 4.20%, with the 2-year, 4.38%. Spot gold up $22 the ounce to $23.87, a gain of 1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.1%, $77.39 right now for a barrel of WTI. University of Michigan out with a fresh assessment on consumer spending, one of a number of key economic reports this morning. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Consumer sentiment nationwide skidded to an 8-month low in late July. The University of Michigan data illustrate the long-term impact of inflation. Savings built up during the pandemic are dwindling and wage growth is moderating. Even so, there's evidence the Federal Reserve is making progress containing inflation. Its preferred measure of inflation, core PCE, rose at a modest pace in June. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
We're keeping an eye on Bristol Myers Squibb today. It raised its 2024 profit forecast as demand for its new medicines suggested the company has gotten past a dip in performance. BMY, Bristol Myers Squibb, advancing now by just about 8.4%. So again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 75, a gain of 1.4%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. Nice Friday here in Washington. They're all gone. It's happened again. The lawmakers have left us for a 6-week tour into the end of summer. So you can park anywhere, get the table at the restaurant, whatever. Run down the middle of the National Mall. If you're actually coming on a tourist trip here, you'll be awfully happy. The weather's beautiful as we try to figure out what's going to happen when they all come back and what will happen in Chicago before that even takes place. The Democratic National Convention gets underway in just a few weeks, and before that is a virtual nominating event that's going to make this official, it seems, for Kamala Harris. The question is who will join her, and we're going to be talking much more about the Veep stakes as we make our way through the following days here. But as we prepare to assemble our panel, Kamala Harris gets a phone call. I do get a kick out of this. Everyone's been waiting around to find out when the last big endorsement is going to drop, knowing that Barack Obama has been on the phone with Kamala Harris repeatedly since Joe Biden dropped out of the race. But, you know, we got to spread this out. You got to use the news cycle a little bit. It's not hard to get. It's just everyone gets their own day, right? So the phone rings. The vice president answers. And who is it? Roll the tape.
Kamala.
Hello. Hi.
Hey there.
Oh, hi. You're both together.
It's the Obamas.
Oh, it's good to hear you both.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh, my goodness. Michelle, Brock, this means so much to me.
She's, of course, not surprised any more than we are. Let's assemble the panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis with us. They've been following every beat of this story. Bloomberg Politics contributors, of course. Jeannie at Iona University, political science professor, as well, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, the smartest pair in the business. Great to see you both. Jeannie, is this a little bit too much for you? Or, I mean, is this fun to watch? Everyone's saying, can't believe he's calling. How did we land the Obamas? But it is important for her to get this done, right?
Important for her to get that. I felt actually a little badly for her watching that. I hate B-roll. And of course, she knew, to your point, that was coming. And it's hard to look natural when you're doing something like that. So she did pretty well. It was expected. There had been some consternation that the Obamas, particularly Barack Obama, had been a little bit slow on doing this, but I think he didn't want to get ahead of the party and make it look like a coronation. And so here we have what we knew was going to happen. happen. I would say one important thing, it was not just Barack, it was Michelle as well. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact they are both going to be on the campaign trail. And can I tell you, when I had my long sit over in the airport when we were trying to leave Milwaukee, the one name I heard from Republicans who were there with me that they were concerned about running against Donald Trump, Michelle Obama. Of course, she is not running, but that fact she's going to be on the campaign trail, it's not scientific, but there you have it.
Isn't that something? Rick, just think of these Republicans stuck in an airport gate with Jeannie Shanzano sharing strategy ideas. Is this important? And I ask you this, Rick Davis, your candidate ran against Barack Obama. Are Barack and Michelle Obama still the kryptonite they were on the campaign trail?
You know, I think they serve a useful purpose. They're not the kryptonite they used to be, but they're still, you know, Democratic Party royalty. Not exactly sure how they appeal to swing voters. They haven't been on a ballot in a long time. People tend to forget. But also, the longer you're out of office, the more popular you are. So certainly the barnacles that he might have had on right after he left office aren't there now. So, yeah, I actually thought it was a pretty inventive way to do this. Obviously, it was finely tuned and orchestrated. There was nothing spontaneous about it. They captured the best audio I've heard in a commercial in a long time. And so, you know, job done, right? I mean, this is sort of the last tumbler to fall before she announces the big pick and on to the convention. So I really feel like actually what I expected to be a hot mess for Democrats who aren't typically this well organized, this thing has gone really swimmingly for her. And if they can keep it up through the convention, she's off to a great start.
Wow, that's Rick Davis talking Democrats. Were you convinced by this? Jeannie, we don't see them. We just hear the voices. Clearly it was staged. I like to think they told her who was calling. Did it work for you?
You know, it did. I mean, you know, it's really, really tough to make these things look spontaneous. I thought it was fine. I would have preferred, of course, them coming and doing something in person. I understand time-wise that is not a reality, but I think it also gives Democrats something to wait for. Imagine if in Chicago that, you know, she is introduced by Barack, Michelle, Joe, and Jill. There you go. I mean, that would be exciting for Democrats. So maybe we have to hold off for that. But, you know, I thought all in all, it worked fine. I didn't have any complaints about it. And I think to Rick's point, this has all gone a lot better than I imagined it could have or would have, with the exception of the slow sort of eking out of the advertising, which is coming now. So that's a good sign.
So you're predicting the Democratic Avengers at the convention in Chicago. We've got our first big poll here. It's a national poll, at least that I'll start with, Rick. Siena College, New York Times. We talk about this one a lot here, and it was taken after the president stepped aside. Kind of interesting to see this. Overall, Donald Trump leads Kamala Harris 48% to 47%. She's narrowed this to just 1 point. Is it too early, considering all the noise in the race right now, to get an accurate read, or does this mean something?
Yes, my first caveat, as you know, I hate national polls, and I hate them even more in the summer. So that being said, it is an interesting poll. In fact, Kamala Harris is up when you build in the five-way ballot, and it's pretty clear that one of the things you can draw from this is that Kennedy's candidacy potentially now takes up way more from Trump than it does from Harris, which is a new development. The other thing I found in this poll, which was shocking to me, is that the mood of the country has improved dramatically since the Republican convention. I don't know what they did there, but you know, the right track is up 27 points. I mean, that is phenomenal. And so that vote lifts the Biden administration, which lifts Harris. So I think that she's getting a lot of acceleration in her numbers. Her fave-unfave is way up. She's much more popular now than she was before the anointment. And I don't know, it looks like a completely different campaign to me. And I suspect we'll see more and more of this kind of polling as people's opinions start to gel.
Producer James referring to the Usinger bump. If you're from Milwaukee, you know what that means. But Jeannie, I'll tell you what, we heard a lot from Republicans, to Rick's point in Milwaukee, about unity. Did they, in fact, unify the Democratic Party?
You know, I think Joe Biden getting out did that. And of course, there's nothing that gets Democrats going like a unified party behind Donald Trump. That said, I don't see this as a new race in particular. What shocked me about this is we are, to a certain extent, right back where we were before Joe Biden's implosion in the debate. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in a dead heat. You know, looking at the margin of error, you can't say she's up or down. To Rick's point, this is a national poll. But here's the problem for Democrats. Democrats cannot be tied or lose in the popular vote and win the Electoral College. Only Republicans can at this point. So this, to me, is a warning sign to Democrats. Yes, you are back where you were. You have a candidate who is not in his 80s, and that has had this rally around the candidate effect. But the reality is the issues that were pinned on Joe Biden, except for age, are still there. And you still have a very, very narrow window here. And so I think what this says is Democrats and Kamala Harris have a lot of work to do. She's got to define herself before the Republicans. I mean, they are out there defining her. She's trying to do the same. If they define her as liberal, that is a big, big problem for her to win in these swing states, particularly in those all-important Rust Belt states. So I thought this was better than when Joe Biden was in a few weeks ago, but it's right back where Democrats were when they were concerned before his debate.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, to Rick's point, though, I guess the rising tide lifting all boats here. Remember the double haters? We talked with Don Levy at Siena about the double haters and with Rick and Jeannie a lot. The number of voters who dislike both candidates in this poll plunging to 8%. That is down from 20% so far this year. But Donald Trump's pollster, Tony Fabrizio, Rick, predicting in a memo here that before long the Harris honeymoon will end and voters will refocus on her role as Joe Biden's partner and co-pilot. Would you be banking on that if you were running the Trump campaign? Let this last a couple of weeks, maybe through the convention, then we get real?
I think this is solely up to the Trump campaign. If Tony wants to make good on this, they're going to have to pour about $100 million of their cash stash into TV ads saying exactly that. Jeannie's right. One of the things that comes out in this poll, and I think we'll see in others, is that even though Harris has good fave, unfave, actually, you know, in some surveys I'm seeing now with Republicans, with Republican pollsters, she's actually more positive than negative, which I never thought I'd live to see that. The reality is, though, she's not well defined. And so Republicans can spend the money to define her. But I'd remind everybody that Democrats have been spending 6 times more on TV up to this point in time in this election than Republicans have. So they got to get in this. But I disagree with Jeannie. I think this is a completely different set of terms. Donald Trump is now leading with some senior voters that he was losing by 5 or 6 to Biden. Kamala Harris is now up with young people in a way that was never seen under the Biden presidency. And there has been an alignment of vote where the Democratic base, young people, Hispanics, blacks, are coming back to the Democratic Party that had fled it before the debate meltdown, and this campaign is getting readjusted. Arguably better for Trump in the Midwest states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, but better for Harris in the Sun Belt. I mean, that is a different race than what we had going into the debate.
As we turn our attention to the Sun Belt, just 1 minute left here, Jeannie. How long will the Harris honeymoon last, if that's what this is?
I don't think it's going to last long. And the reality is there are more younger and people of color voters in those Sunbelt states. She can eke some of those over, but it doesn't change the fact that Democrats need to not do worse than Clinton and Biden did with non-college white voters in those Rust Belt states. And that's the reality of this campaign. And that's what I mean when it hasn't changed. She is still going to have to win those Rust Belt states, all things considered. Assuming she doesn't pick up a Sun Belt state, and it doesn't look at this point like that's in the offing.
Right. Great conversation with our panel. That's Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, of course, our signature panel on balance of power. They'll be back in hour 2 After we dig into some swing state data as well, Spencer Kimball from Emerson College Polling Center will join us as we welcome our global television audience to the conversation. I told you we had a lot to talk about today. We still have to get to Veep stakes. We'll take a look at the economic data out this morning and investigate this meeting between Harris and Netanyahu on Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The Obama endorsement is in the bag. Now time for a running mate. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Vice President Kamala Harris lands the Obama endorsement, checking the final box among Democrats. And we're going to bring you new polling from the swing states just ahead from Spencer Kimball at Emerson College Polling Center. Bloomberg's Michael McKee will join us this hour with a tame reading on inflation this morning, what it means for the economy and for politics. And of course, we'll have analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are along for the ride. After we take a look at Wall Street right now, let's see how the numbers are playing in the markets with an update from Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey,
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. A substantial rally now underway. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher on bets at the start of the Fed easing cycle will keep fueling the outlook for corporate America. Here's where we stand. S&P at 54.83, another leg higher in the past few minutes, up 84 points, just about the best level of the day, up 1.6%. Dow Jones Industrial Average now surging by 807 points, up 2%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 1.5%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.6%, while the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares also taking part in today's advance, up by 1.4%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.20% with the 2-year 4.38% right now. Gold up $24 the ounce, higher by 1%, $23.89 the ounce, and a retreat for West Texas Intermediate crude 77.46 right now, lower by 1%. 3M shares are surging the most in more than 36 years after raising its full-year profit forecast as its new CEO vows to reinvigorate the iconic manufacturer's innovation engine. We've got shares of 3M up now by about 19.4%. So again, recapping, stocks are advancing. S&P, best level of the day, up 86 right now, up 1.6%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you with news on the economy and politics that we need to talk about, all colliding here in a fascinating way to end what has been an historic week in American politics. As we wake up this morning to news, the PCE, the Fed's favored price gauge, rising at a mild pace, spending holding up, fulfilling the hopes, at least, of the Biden administration to where we might be by the time voters are hitting the polls in the fall. It's even got some outliers calling for an interest rate cut next week. I know you don't think that's going to happen, but it's the kind of conversation that this White House wants to be having in Washington and wants to be having with Michael McKee. Bloomberg economics editor joins us right now live from New York with his take on this. Michael, I don't know if you're going to tell me there's trouble under the hood, but this seems like a pretty good stretch of data. And if we're looking for a trend, is this number 3? Have we found one?
Well, it is a good stretch of data, and the numbers aren't that bad, but you could argue it both ways. The administration will glom onto the fact that personal spending rose at a healthy pace the last 2 months, and that inflation was down. The PCE headline number now 2.5% for the year, the core 2.6%, both within shouting range of the 2% target the Fed is looking for, so rate cuts could be in the offing. However, personal income did not rise as much as anticipated, and wages were half what they were in the month of May. So if you were on the other side, you could say the economy is slowing, and then it's a question of how much is it slowing? Are we falling off a cliff? I'm sure one party would make that assumption. And are we doing okay? You'd get from the other side.
If you're Jay Powell, though, Michael, you're looking at this and saying, I love it when a plan comes together?
Yeah, because the GDP numbers for the second quarter, which came out yesterday, showed that growth was stronger than expected and led by personal and business spending. So that part of the economy is doing well. And we haven't yet seen a fall off in the labor markets as jobless claims, which are usually distorted in July anyway, have come back down. Now, the jobs number next week is going to be very important, but it does come after the Fed meeting. Everybody's going to be watching to see if we still get the same rough amount of jobs created, somewhere between 175 and 200,000, and then the unemployment rate, whether it goes up. That would be a harder thing for the Democrats to sell.
Harder to sell, but confirming, I assume, for the Federal Reserve. What do you say to the few analysts and economists out there predicting a cut for next week? Too early for a data-dependent Fed, or too early to communicate to the markets?
Too early for the markets. The Fed doesn't like to surprise the markets, and they haven't made a case for lowering rates at this meeting. So unless they decide that the data have pushed them or they're worried that they're going to fall behind, they're not going to be raising rates this time. The real question is how strong a hint do we get in their statement and from Jay Powell in his press conference about September, and that being the time, that's when the markets think they're going to do it.
Spending, talking about the consumer spending number is interesting to me because the savings rate in this case fell to 3.4%, the lowest since December 22. Michael, what does that tell us about where we are with our savings from COVID? We're digging into it. We've already burned through it.
Well, mostly we've burned through it, but it depends on your income strata. The Fed and the BLS also slice and dice the income numbers. And when you look at it by quintile, the people in the top 20% saw a bump from their COVID payments. Then their total assets went down a little bit, and now they're rising again. That's not true for people in the bottom quintile, the lowest 20%. Their bump went up and then came back down, and it's staying down, basically. It's gone up a little bit in the last few months, but not nearly as much. So it is the people who make less money, who are on the lower end of the income scale, who are suffering the most at this point. And then that has a spillover effect on the economy because they spend most of what they earn because they don't have any money to put into savings. So it's a sort of it could be cast as a tale of two economies.
Understood, as always. You're coming down for the Fed meeting next week, I presume. Will Jay Powell and policymakers telegraph the first rate cut in the statement, or when you gather in the same room with Jay Powell for the news conference?
Well, it's an interesting question. They probably will change the statement to acknowledge that inflation is coming down. They've basically been saying it's still elevated is the word they use. And if they do change the statement, markets will take that as a hint. And then we'll all press Jay Powell to try to go beyond that and give us a date, which he'll try to avoid doing, but I'm sure he'll find some euphemism for pretty soon.
Michael McKee, thank you, and we'll see you in D.C. Bloomberg TV economics editor Michael McKee getting us started here on Balance of Power, reminding you that the flow here on economic data goes directly into the political conversation here in Washington, D.C. And what world will we be in? What will that feel like if there is an interest rate cut in September, right around the same time Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are set reportedly to debate, and people start really making up their minds on how they're going to vote in November? It couldn't be more important to us here on Balance of Power. As we stick with the beat, of course, on politics and add the voice of an expert, Spencer Kimball, who runs the polling center at Emerson College, is with us. And it's great to have you back, Spencer. Welcome back to Balance of Power. I want to get into some new polling. This is really important because Emerson was one of the first to emerge, if not the first, with swing state data in the wake of Joe Biden stepping down and dropping out of this race. And we do have head-to-head numbers on Trump versus Harris. Important to note here, as I read from Emerson College, that Vice President Kamala Harris is trailing Donald Trump in 4 states and tied in another. That would be Wisconsin. But I want to start at a higher level with you, Spencer, before we dig into the granular here. The Trump campaign has been trying to telegraph this as essentially a blip on the radar. It's the same race, the same candidate, just with a different name. In fact, we keep hearing about the Biden-Harris administration when Donald Trump speaks and Republicans kick out messages this week. How about you as a pollster? Is this a game changer? Are we throwing up the pieces in the air? Or is this just a slight aberration on the way to November?
Well, Joe, I think it was a game changer in the sense that after the first debate with President Biden, the Democrats were slowly drifting away from his or supporting his candidacy. And with Harris now, the presumption nominee, she kind of bounced back. She got that younger vote coming back to her. She's got some of that minority vote. So I'm not sure if it's enough to put her over the top, but it's definitely brought it back to a competitive race.
So let's take a look here. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you can see the data as we follow along with Emerson College here. Arizona, you've got 44 for Kamala Harris, 49 for Trump. He's leading as well in Georgia, 48-46. He's leading in Michigan, 46-45. Pennsylvania, 48-46. And we're tied in Wisconsin. You could argue that these are the 5 states that will determine the race. Our swing state poll, in fact, includes 7. But Spencer, that tie in Wisconsin should tell us a lot. And how do these compare to where we were with Joe Biden?
Well, it's interesting. Out in the Midwest, you're watching Harris competing much stronger than where Biden ended up last week after the debate. But where she struggles is out in Arizona. And Arizona is different than these other states. When we ask them their most important issue, for in Arizona, it's immigration, 30%. All of these other states that you mentioned, 40% was economy, was their top issue. And Arizona is different, and that's why potentially you're seeing a different result there at a 5-point lead, while all of the other polls are within 1 or 2 points.
Not a surprise then to see GOP ads, and there have been several already made targeting Kamala Harris, all focus on her record on immigration and border policy. Is that going to be the Achilles heel for the Kamala Harris campaign, knowing that she was assigned to the border by Joe Biden?
Well, certainly former President Trump will try to connect her to that issue. We'll see, obviously, out west how much that's going to play. We're going to take a look at New Mexico and Nevada, where that might be a big issue for those voters on the border. But then we got to look at the Midwest and see how they're playing with immigration. That's really a secondary issue. It's about 10% as the most important issue in those states. And as I mentioned, the economy, that's up at 40%. So while there might be some benefit on, some movement on the immigration, I think in those other states, it's going to be about the economy.
You talked to Democrats about who delegates should support here. And pretty remarkable, considering where we were, Spencer, even a week ago, talking about various governors, whether it was Cooper or Beshear, Shapiro, Whitmer. The Democrat bench was full, we heard. And within, my goodness, 24 hours of Joe Biden announcing his decision when he kicked out that letter, Kamala Harris had the delegates to close the deal. What did you learn from talking with Democrats in this poll?
Well, generally speaking, they're rallying around Harris. As you notice, about 80% in each state would like Harris to be the nominee. And so that, I think, has a lot to do with some fallout from President Biden's debate performance, where Democrats were really concerned about not being able to beat Donald Trump. They see in Vice President Harris a potential candidate who will be more competitive. And that's what we're seeing in the numbers.
Let's play the Veep stakes here. You asked voters about her selection of a running mate, Spencer. What did you learn?
Well, each state has their favorite son or daughter. We can go up to Michigan and they want their governor, Gretchen Whitmer. If we go out to Arizona, they want their senator, Mark Kelly. Georgia, Wisconsin, they're not quite sure. They kind of jump around between Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. But probably the strongest candidate out there is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Very popular in his home state. And Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes up for grabs.
Well, yeah, just among Democratic voters overall, Shapiro gets 57%. Next in line, Mark Kelly at 42%. Is it because Democrats believe Shapiro can carry Pennsylvania for Kamala Harris?
Well, I'm not sure if that's what's driving Shapiro's support, but I do notice is that he's got a lot of support amongst younger voters. And we don't really see that with any other Democratic candidate except for Bernie Sanders. So it would be interesting if he could kind of carry that baton of the youth vote that Bernie Sanders has been carrying for about 8 years.
Well, it's interesting, too, to see Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, 42% prefer their senator. Maybe that shouldn't be a surprise. But I wonder your thoughts on the Sun Belt versus the Rust Belt. Our Republican analyst, Rick Davis, was talking about this a bit earlier, that we spent so much time talking about the blue wall, that it was Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Kamala Harris may be opening a new path in the Sun Belt states. Do you agree?
Not right now. Look at Arizona. That's a big 5 points right there that she has to make up. And the top issue there is not something that is her strength. Maybe on the economy, as you were mentioning earlier, it seems to be rebounding. The markets are doing better. That might be, Bidenomics might be campaign theme more than the immigration. So it's going to be interesting in the Sun Belt. North Carolina was a state that we kind of moved off of the swing states. We'll see if she can bring it back in. About, a fifth of the population there is African American. So that might give her a bounce in North Carolina. But I think giving up that blue wall, that's a big path for the Democratic success, and I would be very hesitant to do that.
So it sounds a lot like Shapiro to me based on this conversation, but I know the rules change based on the campaign. You asked an important question, Spencer, and I don't mean to be reading into this. You can tell me if I'm going in the wrong direction here, but a majority of Democratic voters in each state you talk to think Kamala Harris should be nominated at the Democratic National Convention this August. Does that imply that they do not want her to be nominated in this virtual call about a week from now?
I'm not sure about that. I think the virtual call is kind of going under the radar. That has to deal with the Ohio ballot access issue.
Yes.
It's going to have to obviously deal with potentially her running mate if that call has to go forward. It's a little gray about, the necessity of that call, but regarding the convention, I don't think that they would mix it up. I think they're looking for a new horse, and they were concerned that the president wasn't going to be able to win. And that's why we're seeing this.
As we spend time with Spencer Kimball from Emerson College polling out with some of the first swing state data we're seeing since Joe Biden dropped out of the race. We're waiting for a debate, Spencer. I bet you are too. And it's interesting because we don't know if we're going to have one now. Kamala Harris tweeting last night, what happened to anytime, any place? Because Donald Trump, I guess, doesn't like the venue or the network here that we were looking at for the next one. Trump spokesman Steve Chung says debate plans, quote, cannot be finalized until Democrats formally decide on their nominee. Based on your experience, do you think Trump's trying to get out of this? And will that have a bearing on polling and the final result in November? Voters want to see these two on stage together, right?
I would think so. I'm hoping that there'll be a debate. Obviously, the last debate had tremendous impact on this race, and so we'll see what the next debate might have. But with that said, voters are going to kind of come back in after Labor Day and focus in. And we've seen this previous years. If you remember, 16 years ago, John McCain was up 2 points after his convention and ends up losing to Obama by 7 or 8. So we see these swings in the polls when different things occur. This is a big shakeup, and I think it's going to take a few weeks for things to settle down.
Interesting to see no Trump convention bump. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that Trump kind of got his bump the previous week on the attempted assassination. Yeah, right. You saw it in the polls. He was up 6 points nationally. We haven't seen a Republican up that much since George Bush in 88. So that was that was a big bump. He seems, with Biden dropping out on Sunday, that seems to have taken away that momentum, if there was momentum with the J.D. Vance pick. And then now we're going to talk about the Democrats.
Well, I'm glad you could join, as always, Spencer Kimball with the breakdown on new numbers from Emerson College polling, where he is the director. We'll play it to the panel next. Rick Davis, by the way, says they lost by 6, but who's counting? This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks heading for their best day since February after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Federal Reserve will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. S&P up 83 to 54.83 in advance of 1.6%. The Dow's up 787 points now, a gain of 2%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is up 254 points, up by 1.5%. 10-year at 4.20% with a 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold is climbing by $21 the ounce, up 0.9%. A retreat for crude, 77.46 a barrel right now on WTI, down by 1.1%. Big move for Bitcoin, up 3.3%, 67,444 on Bitcoin. Charter Communication shares are rallying after the cable and wireless company reported revenue that beat analyst estimates, boosted by a surge in residential mobile service. Charter up now by 16.8%. Again, recapping, stocks are rallying. S&P up 84, a gain of 1.6%. 10-year 4.20%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, and here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the Friday Trade. We thank you, sir. We'll be back with Charlie a little bit later on this hour as we keep tabs on the markets. Always here as we talk politics on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us on the Friday edition. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where yesterday it was all about Benjamin Netanyahu here, meeting with the President of the United States. We talked about it at length. We brought you in the Oval Office for the pool spray, as they call it, as these two sat down, not agreeing on everything these days, certainly when it comes to a ceasefire. But there was another meeting that Benjamin Netanyahu held yesterday, and that was with the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Now, of course, suddenly at the top of the ticket, she gets her own sit-down, her own one-on-one with Benjamin Netanyahu, having an opportunity to delve into foreign policy. And unlike the president, this is really interesting, Kamala Harris spoke to the press after her meeting. We did not hear from Joe Biden following his. Here's a bit of what she said.
It is time for this war to end, and end in a way where Israel is secure, all the hostages are released, the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can exercise their right to freedom, dignity, and self-determination.
We assemble our panel for their take on this moment in the campaign. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel. And a really interesting take earlier today in Politico, Jeannie, that in fact, Kamala Harris is saying all of the same things, essentially, almost word for word, as Joe Biden. But her words are being interpreted differently by Democrats here in Washington, many of whom have been critical of Joe Biden for the lack of a ceasefire deal, for the number of civilian casualties in Gaza. How does she leverage this moment for her campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that assessment. I think for many Democrats, we all know this has been such a divisive issue. And yesterday's speech, if you will, by Kamala Harris was so important because it's the first time we've heard her speak out in her own voice, not just as an emissary of Joe Biden on a foreign policy issue. And what struck me was how similar it was in substance to the Biden campaign, or the Biden administration rather, but how her words were being interpreted differently, in part because her rhetoric is a bit different. She was, it was noticeable, for instance, that she took the time to carefully read out the names of each of those American hostages held by Hamas. She talked about the fact that Israel has a right to defend itself. And then she also walked this line of saying that she understands and is sensitive to the amount of civilian casualties and devastation in the Gaza Strip. So from that perspective, the rhetoric was a little bit sharper, if you will, than Joe Biden's has ever been, but the substance was the same. And I think this is something that is going to be left unresolved for Democrats. That's the first time. And in my mind, she's walking a very similar line to the Biden administration. Let's get a deal done. But there's not really a different path forward to doing that, if you will.
This is interesting to me, Rick. I wonder your thoughts as we hear from a former staffer to two members of the squad, Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush. This is Abbas Alaway writing, Harris conveyed more sympathy for the plight of civilians in Gaza than President Biden did at any point. Abbas is the person who led the uncommitted movement in Michigan, Rick. Kamala Harris really isn't saying much different from Joe Biden in this case, is she?
No, this is just situational politics. They needed a scalp because they had been losing within their own caucus, the Democrats, on this issue. The far left, disagreed with the vast majority of Democrats. So they had to be mad at Biden. Biden was just as empathetic for the plight of civilians and Palestinians as anybody else in the party was going to be, but that wasn't going to be good enough for the left flank of his party. And so they took it out on him. And it created a weakness at a time when he was trying to consolidate the party. So they did some pretty good damage to Joe Biden at the time. Now, he's gone. Long live the king. Kamala Harris has done a much better job than anybody expected her to consolidate the Democratic Party in less than a week. And they are attributing the exact same statements she's making that Biden made to being a new look. And frankly, an amazing opportunity for her to seem like she's different than Joe Biden, which is a positive politically, without actually taking any risk to do it.
Well, I suspect she'll seem pretty different than Donald Trump on this issue if they get on a debate stage, Jeannie. And I'd like to hear your thoughts from both of you on this. I thought we had a debate. Everybody was a tough guy a minute ago. The Trump campaign now refusing to debate with Kamala Harris because she's not officially the nominee. Trump spokesman Stephen Chung issuing a statement here that plans cannot be finalized, quote, until Democrats formally decide on their nominee, knowing, of course, that, well, the debate was set for September. Nominating process happens in August. Harris posting on X in response, what happened at any time, any place? Jeannie, will there be one?
Let us hope. I am hoping there will be. It's fascinating because Donald Trump was willing to debate Joe Biden when he wasn't nothing more than she is the presumptive nominee. And so you see Kamala Harris there showing a little bit of bravado. What happened to anywhere, anytime, any place. I suspect it depends in part on where we are poll-wise and everything else, whether this goes forward, and what the rules of something like this look like. I've heard from people on the Democrat side who say that they don't know if this is something that Kamala Harris should do, but I am sure hoping that she does. And I think looking at the last debate, it can change a lot in these races. So we do have Americans really deserve to hear from both of them together.
What do you think about this one, Rick? Who has more to lose? Will there be a debate?
Well, I didn't think Joe Biden should debate Donald Trump, which turned out to be a disaster. And I got to tell you, I think they are high-fiving each other down in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, Susie Wiles has to be thrilled with that statement because the last thing they want to do is put Donald Trump on a stage with Kamala Harris. He is not a good debater. He's lost virtually every debate he's ever had. He would have lost the debate with Joe Biden had he not had a complete collapse by Joe Biden. It was a horrible debate for him. And once you see through the smoke, you realize this is not the way they want to conduct their campaign. They want to keep the attention on Kamala Harris, and they're going to do it through TV and radio and social media. And they don't need to risk getting on a stage with her. And so they'll find all kinds of different ways to avoid it. But my bet is they avoid it to the end.
Well, pretty remarkable when you consider the money that's already being spent in the ad wars here. MAGA PAC, the main PAC supporting Trump, adding $32 million in ads, attacking Kamala Harris through Labor Day. Jeannie, Future Forward, the big Dem PAC backing Harris, is going to spend $50 million on advertising in 6 states over the next 3 weeks. This gets back to what we were talking about yesterday. This is the race to identify Kamala Harris. Who's going to win it?
Yeah, the race to define Kamala Harris. And it is anybody's game right now. It is a jump ball, and Democrats really have to catch up on this. There is a great YouGov poll which shows the fact that voters see her policy-wise as similar to Joe Biden, and that is liberal, and that is going to be a problem for her in those key Rust Belt states that you were just talking about. So she really needs to define herself, and we're hearing that, but we need to hear more of that.
What do you think about this, Rick? The Republican ads from this week that were created in the wake of Joe Biden's announcement all refer to the Biden-Harris administration. Is that the right strategy, and is that what we're going to get the rest of the campaign?
I would. There's no question she's a part of it. She's been party to all those decisions. The economy especially has suffered under the Biden-Harris administration. And why not? It's fair game. I think that this is part of what they're going to try to do in this interim period. Go into her convention. Obviously, she has to do a better job than the president has done defining what they have accomplished on the economy and what their plan is going forward. It'll be interesting to see whether she rolls out a more aggressive inflation-fighting program than what the administration is currently pursuing.
That would be fascinating. Are they spending enough in this case? Rick, Future Forward, the Democrat PAC, spending $50 million on ads, as I mentioned, in 6 states. Is that a number that you would have arrived at?
Look, I mean, I think combined with what the Harris campaign can spend on their, now that we've been hearing anecdotally.
Right there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello?
I got you now, Rick. Finish your thought, yeah.
Hey, great. Democrats have been outspending Trump 6-1. I don't think that percentage is going to change much. They've got a load of cash there.
Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, great conversation and a great analysis from both of you. Rick, we heard you and appreciate your finishing your thought here on Balance of Power. Much more to follow with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. They'll join us on the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's bring you up to date on world and national news. Right now, Amy Morris joins us from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Service on France's high-speed trains was disrupted by what officials are describing as coordinated sabotage ahead of the Olympic opening ceremonies. Jean-Pierre Farandot is the chief executive of France's state railways company, SNCF, and he says it's still too early to know who is responsible for this.
There's an inquiry running at the moment, so the police force are looking after, of course, the people who have committed this assault against the French network.
SNCF's Jean-Pierre Farandot. The railway company estimates 800,000 passengers have been affected by what it describes as a massive attack aimed at paralyzing the high-speed line network. Barack and Michelle Obama endorsing Kamala Harris in the Democratic race for president. The former president and first lady released a video this morning showing Vice President Harris speaking on the phone with both of them.
I'm looking forward to doing this with the two of you, Doug and I both, and getting out there, being on the road. But most of all, I just want to tell you the words you have spoken and the friendship that you have given over all these years mean more than I can express. So thank you both.
In a joint statement, the Obamas said that there was no doubt in their mind that Kamala Harris can win. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Every major group in the S&P 500 rising on bets that the start of the Fed easing cycle will keep fueling the outlook for corporate America. Stocks on track for their best day since February after key economic data this morning bolstered speculation that the Fed will be setting the stage next week for a rate cut in September. Yes, we'll have Jay Powell's remarks live on Bloomberg Radio and Television. Make sure you catch it live here on Bloomberg. S&P right now up 63, a gain of 1.2%. The Dow up 657, up by 1.7%. NASDAQ higher by 167, up 1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up now by 1.2%. 10-year 4.20% with a 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold up $18 the ounce, up 0.8%, 23.82. And West Texas Intermediate crude now down 1.2%, 77.34 barrel. Bottom line, big rally underway. Shares of 3M are surging 18.5%, the most in more than 36 years, after raising its full-year profit forecast. And U.S. authorities are accusing the famed short seller Andrew Left of committing fraud through stock trades, social media posts, and research reports, their biggest move in a years-long crackdown against traders who tout their bearish bets. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 63, up 1.2%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're live from Washington, D.C., with our eyes on the campaign trail and today's economic data, as we have been discussing both over the course of 2 hours here. A major moment, we can all agree, an historic moment in American politics here. It's also an historic moment for the media business, with hundreds of millions of dollars already spent on ads, more reserved on ads, and even more will be spent in the late fall as we make our way to November, with the news media struggling to cover this the right way, having gone through this before with a Donald Trump and a female Democratic presidential candidate. We've talked a lot about the rhetoric at play here and the challenges facing a news media tasked with live fact-checking and, of course, bearing out the truth here from both campaigns. We're joined by Jane Hall, back with us on Bloomberg, American University professor of journalism and media studies and author of the book Politics in the Media, Intersections and New Directions. Jane, welcome back. It looks like a new direction for us here, but it also feels back to the future in a way, as we're reminded of some of the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using on the campaign trail, referring to Kamala Harris as dumb as a rock, as a radical, wants to be the president for savage criminals and illegal aliens. To what extent is this going to resonate with voters, having already heard some of this stuff before, and how should the news media be covering it?
It is in some ways back to the future, but I think that this is a very different moment in the media and in our politics than when Hillary Clinton had to figure out whether to call out Donald Trump for literally circling her on the stage. Kamala Harris is clearly moving to define herself and outrank and outrace Donald Trump and trying to tie her to the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. And what's very interesting to me is that if they do debate, and she's calling for that split screen, she will be far more effective, of course, than Joe Biden was able to be. But she also, I will be very interested to see how she says that she's going to prosecute the case. You know, if the news media call him out and ask him, how do you feel being called a 78-year-old criminal? They're clearly going to ask her, how do you feel being called a DEI hire? You know, that was one of the things that happened in the debates. And I think what's going to be interesting to see is, are the media going to ask her and him about the terrible things that are already racist, sexist, misogynist? You know, I think the other thing is that they don't seem to really know how to deal with a woman candidate. They seem to have been caught flat-footed. He said, I'm not going to be nice. He's deliberately mispronouncing her name. And that all reads as kind of a redo of Barack Obama in many ways, saying that he was not a legitimate citizen. The birther thing that happened. I mean, I think that the fact that they're being warned not to be racist and sexist, and they may not be able to keep Trump from doing that, is in Kamala Harris's favor ultimately.
Remarkable. It seems the Speaker of the House knows what you're talking about. We heard about this, Mike Johnson and Representative Richard Hudson, who chairs the NRCC, tasked with getting Republicans elected, asking members to cool the rhetoric. They can't do this with Donald Trump, but they did ask rank and file members of the House, Republican members, to stop with the DEI hire. To your point, I think it was Glenn Grothman, Representative Republican from Wisconsin, said that she was the likely nominee, quote, because of her ethnic background, unquote. This is part of the composite that you're talking about here. And it's one thing to cool it off in the House. It's a different thing for Donald Trump. You just said, he just said yesterday, I'm not going to stop being critical of Kamala Harris. So what are we in for?
Well, I think we're in for a campaign that is going to be fought very, very strongly, as you all mentioned in the ads. The right-wing media are clearly going to try to tie her to what is a big issue for them, immigration. I mean, that's one where I think she's vulnerable because she was tasked with that. And she's, they're going to make the point that a bipartisan bill didn't pass because of Donald Trump, but she's going to be smeared in the right-wing media. Fox News is going to go after her. Trump is going to go after her. But what she has in her favor, I believe, is that the policies that have been enacted, the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court, policies that they can frame as anti-women of color. I think she's already benefiting also from all the memes and the social media. You can't buy that. That is organic. Young people saying, this is exciting. She's going to have to win over people beyond young people, but she's clearly already moving ahead among voters on the Democratic side. And, there are a lot of women over 50 who are a huge component. They aren't talked about as much, but there are a lot of women who don't like seeing another woman derided that way. Forget whether it's racist or misogynist or both. I mean, I think they've got a real problem if they try to link her that way. And I think, as I've said, it's going to be out there, whether it's stated explicitly or whether it's under the radar. And she has an opportunity to reframe that just by saying, this is what I've done. This is who I've been.
Well, sure. It goes both ways, of course. You may not find an equivalency here, but what do you make of the whole weird talk of the Democrats describing Republicans? It got to the point now where ABC News even wrote this up. Democrats' new line of attack on Republicans. You're being weird. This goes back to something that Kamala Harris said back in 2016, if Trump had followed her around the stage, something that you brought up earlier. But we're getting now Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, supposedly on the short list for vice president, saying this on MSNBC on Tuesday. These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away, be in your exam room. These are weird ideas. Is weird the new deplorable?
Oh, that's a very good point. I hope everybody knows you're referring to Hillary Clinton's remarks about a basket full of deplorables that she said. Yeah. I think that personally, I think going after anybody who's a voter who is on any side and calling them weird is not exactly the way to win. You can say they have weird ideas. Unfortunately for the Republicans, J.D. Vance has been called out and video has been shown where he talks about women, the phrase, childless cat ladies. I think that some of that is going to be talked about as being weird, but I do see an equivalency. I mean, I don't think you should be demonizing any voter if you want to get elected. I think what Democrats have been hoping for is somebody who could talk about what they've done and also take the fight to Donald Trump. I mean, that is what I think she is highly capable of doing.
Well, just like that, our crack team of producers has brought us a piece of tape to show what we're talking about and a couple of voices we're going to hear. Let's listen.
Donald seems to be drifting away from his own nominee because he's had so many weird views that he's expressed.
I see Donald Trump talking about the wonderful Hannibal Lecter or whatever weird thing he's on tonight. That needs to end.
What was weird was him joking about racism today and then talking about Diet Mountain Dew. Who drinks Diet Mountain Dew?
So you have Governors Pritzker and Waltz talking there earlier. Look, I realize this is part of the game here, Jane. Obviously, you need a thick skin to be in politics. But do Democrats, does Kamala Harris need to call off the dogs the way Speaker Johnson did on the House?
Wow, that's such an interesting question. I personally, I come from a part of the state where there are a lot of Republican voters. I'm not sure. I think you can go after J.D. Vance just as J.D. Vance is going to go after Kamala Harris. I mean, people use their vice presidents as attack dogs. I hate to use that phrase, but I'm conservative on this. I think talk about what J.D. Vance said, talk about the policies, take the stance that Trump wants to take women back and people of color back. But I think it's early to say, but to call any voter weird, in my mind, you can say J.D. Vance is weird or J.D. Vance's ideas are weird. That's going to resonate because he's got a trail of video that is very odd in terms of women and children. It's just true.
Well, if you were watching, the Milwaukee convention on that Thursday night to see Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off and the whole experience, you might have different ideas about who they were trying to reach and what exactly the message was in prime time there, Jane. I have to ask you, and weigh in on it if you want in our last couple of minutes, but if we'd known about this, Kamala Harris, top of the ticket, before Donald Trump chose J.D. Vance, would he have gone with a different running mate?
Ooh, man, you're asking such good questions, in my opinion. I don't know. I think he went for somebody that he thought, would be a red meat person. I don't know if they would have made a different choice. They could have gotten Nikki Haley to run. They might have had a stronger ticket.
Nikki Haley, Tim Scott. I just wonder if they had gone in a direction other than another white man. Imagine the debate between Kamala Harris and Elise Stefanik or whomever Kamala Harris's running mate would be. Something to consider, isn't it?
Well, it is. We're into a whole gender thing. I mean, Hulk Hogan's, as the definition of men in this country, that's an argument that's very, very interesting in terms of gender and media. She's organizing white people, men for Kamala. I mean, they are very candidly going for a broader audience than might be perceived as being the narrow appeal that the Republicans are going to try to say she has.
Mm-hmm. We started this with a conversation about media coverage. How important is it for these two to debate, Jane? Because it looks like we're dancing around this idea now. Kamala Harris is saying, what happened to anytime, anywhere? Donald Trump says we need an official nominee. This isn't going to happen, is it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what I would advise. I mean, I think Kamala Harris is smart enough to know the traps for a woman. Women still have traps if they're too strident, if their voice is wrong. I mean, Hillary Clinton endured an awful lot of this. So, I think it would be to her advantage to be able to talk about what her administration has done. I don't see any advantage to his doing it other than, I cannot imagine how anybody advising him would. He managed to hold it together in an hour and a half with Joe Biden. I mean, he has a record of going off the rails, particularly around women. I would not advise him to debate with her. Maybe she can debate an empty chair. Maybe they'll figure out some way that they can talk about how he isn't willing to debate her.
That's 2 this hour. Rick Davis said the same thing. Jane, it's great to have you back. We appreciate it, as always. Jane Hall at American University. The book is Politics in the Media, Intersections and New Directions. And boy, we are taking a new direction here, it seems. Watching Wall Street, by the way, does Kamala Harris need to start tweeting the markets? Maybe this is the new way to find some sunlight between herself and Joe Biden. Donald Trump would be tweeting all day today, Tim Stenovic. The Dow's up 670 points.
Yeah, I don't know. It had never been the Biden-Harris administration's thing. But then again, Joe, if she is trying to put some daylight between her and Joe Biden, maybe she does have to break from tradition over the last 3.5 years. Who knows?
And start pointing people to the good stuff. You got good data today. She's going to maybe, look, there could be a rate cut in September. Start tweeting about it now. Of course, Tim Stenovic and Emily Graffeo about to hold forth on Bloomberg Business Week. right after Balance of Power. Tim, what do you have coming up today?
Hey, we're talking to Michael McKee, International Economics and Policy Correspondent, all about that data that you just mentioned. Plus, we're going to get an update about what exactly is going on in Paris, that massive attack on those trains. Yeah. The opening ceremonies, they're underway now, Joe, but we'll get an update from Paris on what's going on there.
Can you explain the coconut tree to me next time we talk?
Yeah, I can do that. I can do it.
Just start Googling it now. Get your emojis ready. Tim, we'll be listening, of course, and Emily on Bloomberg Business Week. We'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power, 5 o'clock on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
A very good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, radio, streaming on YouTube, and on Bloomberg Originals. I'm Tim Stenovec. Carol Master is off today. Joining me is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Griffeo for this Friday edition of Bloomberg Business Week. How are you, Emily?
I'm good. I'm doing well.
Hey, thanks for joining me for the next hour on TV, the next 3 on TV, radio, and YouTube. And we got a great couple of hours coming up. This hour specifically, markets cheering a series of Fed-friendly data points, including core PCE figures that rose at a tame pace in June. Also, consumer spending remained healthy. Stocks up, yields down. More on that in just a minute with Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Mike McKee, who is standing by.
And still ahead, a quote, massive attack on Paris's super-fast rail network has disrupted trains and cast a shadow over tonight's opening ceremony. We have the latest on the sabotage and why, separately, the Olympic cyber team is bracing for an onslaught from hackers.
Okay, well, from hackers to comedy, Joe Rogan, the world's most controversial podcaster, widely considered the most popular podcaster in the world as well. He's building a Texas comedy empire after fleeing California. We get the latest from Felix Gillette.
And we're joined by the managing partner of Illumin Capital, a fund working to achieve racial and gender equity across investing.
All that and more over the next hour. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellett.
Thank you very much, Tim and Emily. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, Russell 2000, NASDAQ 100 index, all rallying today with gains of 1% or more. The U.S. stock market getting a big boost at the end of a wild week after key economic data bolstered speculation that the Fed will set up the stage for a rate cut in September. Every major group in the S&P 500 higher right now. S&P back at 54.66, up now by 66 points, a gain of 1.2%. We're off session highs. The Dow up 690 points, up 1.7%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index up 182, higher now by 1.1%. The Russell 2000 of small cap, the index of small cap shares up now by 1.3%. 10-year 4.19% with a 2-year yielding 4.38%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.8%, and West Texas Intermediate crude at right around $77 a barrel, down today by just about 1.3%. Dexcom shares are plunging after the company cut its full-year sales forecast for the glucose monitoring devices that are relied upon by diabetics. Shares today of Dexcom, they are now down by 41%. So again, recapping here, 700-point gain for the Dow, up 1.8%, S&P up by 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellett, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
41%, that is what you call a haircut. Well, the Fed's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation, core PCE, rose at a modest pace in June. Consumer spending also remained healthy, encouraging signs for officials who are looking to cool inflation without breaking the economy. As far as the numbers look, core PCE, of course it strips out volatile food and energy, rose 0.2% from May. From a year ago, it rose 2.6%. That's according to Bureau of Economic Analysis data that came out this morning. Wall Street's certainly happy about the data. We see stocks higher. We see yields lower. For more, we turn to Bloomberg News international economic and policy correspondent Michael McKee, who joins us here in the studio. Mike, is this exactly what Jay Powell wants to see?
Yeah. Basically, I was going to say not quite, but I think he'll settle for this.
He wanted to see it even lower.
They wanted to get back to 2%, but they did say that they were going to start cutting interest rates before they got to 2%. And he had said a little while ago that the range of 2 to 2.5%, as long as they got into that range, they'd be good.
So any change for next week based on this data?
No, because they didn't set the markets up for that. They don't like to surprise the markets. Now, I suppose there could always be a leak to the Wall Street Journal. That's only happened once in the last 15 years or so, but people do think of it as a realistic possibility occasionally. But in this case, I think they will be satisfied to wait, because what ends up happening is that bond yields go down if they signal that they're going to cut rates in September, and so they get the effect of a rate cut even without doing it.
So square the data that we got today with the GDP data that we had earlier this week. Are we in a Goldilocks scenario now with inflation moving in the right direction and the economy still strong?
Well, I'll see your cliche and raise you one and say soft landing. I think either one is probably a good description, but only as to where we are right now, because we don't know what's coming around the corner, and there are certainly analysts who think that we could be closer to an economic contraction than anything else. But right now, it looks pretty good. The GDP numbers were strong and led mostly by consumption, business and consumer spending, which is what you want to see. You want to see the demand remain. It wasn't too bad. Personal spending rose just 0.3 in the month of June. May and April had been revised higher, which helped the GDP numbers. So overall, it's exactly kind of what the Fed wants to see. Sustainable growth. 2.8% is a little high, but they anticipate it coming down. But sustainable growth with continually falling inflation.
Okay, so separately, U.S. consumer sentiment eased in July to an 8-month low, showed that consumers see prices remaining high, and that cooling inflation rate has not yet helped improve their mood. Why do consumers remain so unhappy in this environment?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is, you've heard this before, that it's the price level, not the price change, that bothers people. And another is the overhang of bad news that we have had in so many areas in the last 6 months or so, the wars and the violence and that sort of thing, and the attempted assassination of Donald Trump occurred when they were surveying. Now, what probably did not get picked up was the change in at the head of the Democratic ticket. When you look under the hood, and the University of Michigan's been surveying this for a long time, but they ask people, if you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, are you more confident or less confident? And Democrats were less confident, Republicans only slightly more confident, and independents less confident. And given the reaction that we have seen anecdotally and in some polls already, you would expect Democrats to be feeling a little bit better right now. So maybe we get that next month.
Yeah, maybe. We'll have to wait and see. Mike, what about the idea that generationally inflation hasn't been around in many lifetimes of consumers, perhaps consumers who are completing these surveys? Does that have to do with this too?
It probably does, because you get used to a certain price level and you get used to inflation being so low. Alan Greenspan's goal always was that people could make decisions without factoring inflation into it, and that was the case for so long. And now people had to cut back on spending because prices were going up so much so rapidly. It's also true that it hits the lower income people much worse than upper income people, because they spend most of what they earn, and inflation's been tough on them. But I think the generational aspect is also true, because of course there are those of us who remember the 12, 13, 14% mortgage rates that we once had in the olden days.
Yeah, well,
you remember that?
I do not remember that. Thank you, Emily, for bringing that up. But it is something we hear a lot when people do complain about 7% mortgages. Yeah. But there are a lot of differences between that environment in the early 1980s and the environment today. Here's what the team at Bloomberg Economics said about some of the data that we got today, Mike. Though spending continued to grow at a healthy, albeit slower clip, income growth slowed more rapidly. And with the labor market cooling, we think consumption growth will ease further in the second half of the year. Is there concern that it will slow to the extent that we could start to see negative payrolls? We could start to see a recession?
That would be a kind of far left tail risk. It's not what most people are anticipating. Slowing is what we should be getting with the Fed interest rates where they are. And even if they cut in September, 25 basis points isn't going to spur a lot of people. 6.75 mortgage is just as bad almost as a 7%. But it's going to be the process that starts sending it down that will make people feel better.
Okay, before we let you go, we talked a little bit about the Fed meeting coming next week, the payrolls report coming on Friday. 175,000 is what I saw at last look for jobs gained during the current month that we're in. What do we need to be on the lookout for a week from today?
Well, two things. We'll be looking to see, if the last 2-3 months, we have had forecasts in the range of 175, 180, and they've come in significantly above that. So we'll have to see if that trend continues, and if the other trend of the previous months being revised down continues. But the biggest thing is going to be the unemployment rate this time. We're at 4.1% now. That's the forecast for another month. But if it goes to 4.2, we're going to trigger the SOM rule. And
Claudia's phone will be ringing.
Claudia's phone will be ringing, and it will, as I said, scare the markets, scare the horses, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. There will be people in that case who are saying, you got to cut right away, because it already means we're going into recession. Fed doesn't think so, because they think it's not that people are getting laid off, but just more people coming into the labor force that is pushing up unemployment. And that, in the long run, is a good thing.
Yeah, labor force participation. You want to see that go in the right direction. Our thanks to Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee, staying late for us on this Friday because he was in really, really early this morning, so we appreciate that. Well, the opening ceremony is continuing as normal in Paris for the Olympics after a, quote, massive attack on the country's super-fast rail network disrupted trains and cast a shadow over the event. It's not just the trains that the organizers are concerned about, though. The Olympic cyber team is bracing for an onslaught from hackers. So writes Jamie Tarabay, Bloomberg News cybersecurity reporter. She joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Jamie, good to see you on this afternoon. I want to start with the trains because lots of us in the U.S. here waking up to the news that French Transport Minister Patrice Vergret said were, quote, coordinated malicious acts that targeted several TGV lines and will seriously disrupt traffic until this weekend. What's the latest? Do we know who's behind the attacks? Do we know the motives behind the attacks? And do we know when these trains will be up and running again?
Look, right now, there has been no claim of responsibility, but it could frankly be any number of groups that are seeking to destabilize these games. They are in the heart of Paris. The entire world is watching, and whether it's homegrown, disenfranchised actors. We've seen France go through a very particularly tumultuous period recently. And of course, we have external forces as well. The physical security aspect of the games has been something that has been a really big concern amongst the French authorities. They've brought on tens of thousands of soldiers and police force and even private security guards to be part of that effort. They've had anti-drone exercises happening within the city. Because the games are happening in the heart of town, along landmarks, there is an even greater exposure to possible weaknesses in the system. And this wasn't a coordinated arson attack. And I understand that they're still in the process of getting everything back on track, but it's a big glaring target for a lot of different people with a lot of different motives to destabilize and ruin this for France and for the international sporting community.
Jamie, talk a little bit more about the extent of the damage that a cyber attack like this one has caused. We know that rail traffic was disrupted and that there were fires. Explain a little bit more what actually happens when there is a cyber attack at this scale.
So we know that this was an arson attack. So sounds like it was a deliberately set fire at each of these signal stations. A cyber attack would come in from the systems itself and cause a breakdown or a shutdown of an electric grid, of a network, of computers. It could reboot. It could cause all kinds of chaos. We could see hackers try to get malware into a system to lock it up and paralyze it. We've seen that happen in past Olympic Games, in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, on opening day, on the opening ceremony. In fact, there was a very disruptive cyber attack, which was later attributed to Russian actors. There are so many different points along the critical infrastructure that make up the games. The French cybersecurity agency, ANSSI, has named 500 different entities that they say are critical to the smooth operation of the games. They've been working with these groups for months, if not years, to shore them up, to audit their systems, and look at how they can be as strong and as muscular as possible when it comes to anticipating and expecting these attacks and being able to respond if and when they do see them.
Jamie, talk a little bit about the Russia element here, because as they have in Olympics past for other reasons, they are not necessarily present as they have been in the past at the Olympics this year, shut out in a sense. Give us an understanding of where Russia is when it comes to potential cyber attacks and